Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the December 13, 2011 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. This is in fact the last meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council in the year 2011. There are agendas on both sides of the room, so if you'd like to pick a copy up and please follow along with us tonight, you're welcome to do so. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment on items on our agenda, both items on the agenda as well as items of a general nature. It is our custom to begin each meeting by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this point in time, I would ask that everyone please stand and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now I'd like to ask our fine village clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Rankin?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner Schnell?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much, April. That brings us to item 3, which concerns approval of minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set tonight, and that's from December 6th, 2011. Are there any corrections, comments, changes, or whatnot from any members of the council with respect to those minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve them, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? They are approved as presented. That brings us to item number 4 on our agenda tonight, which is the segment for public comment. This is the segment for public comment on items that are not appearing on our agenda tonight. So if you have any questions or comments of a general nature concerning our fine village, we would invite you at this time to please come down to the podium, give us your name and your address, and we would be glad to hear from you. Are there any comments of a general nature? I see we will have some. Good evening.
Made it just in time. Good evening. My name is Laura Crawford. I am here representing the Downers Grove Area Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I have a couple comments to make, and admittedly, one of them does have to do with the agenda. But I have addressed the council on a couple different items that you've addressed recently, and I wanted to provide some feedback for you after speaking to some chamber members on those. The first is the energy aggregation program. If you recall, I asked you to consider your core services a couple weeks ago. And I do want to disclose that the chamber does have a program aggregating electrical rates. We offer rates at 0.057, saving 28% from the ComEd bills. Since I came to the dais last, I have learned that the village, should a referendum pass, intends to sign a one-year-only contract. I'm out of breath because I've been running. Sorry. I think I ran all the way from the building up on Butterfield. But what I think is really the home run for the village residents is that you have every intention of passing 100% of the savings on to the residents, and I congratulate you for that. I think it's absolutely wonderful, and although the chamber cannot possibly support or a core service being cutting a private sector price, we certainly congratulate you on finding a way to reduce utility costs for our residents. And I would like it noted that one of the core services that the chamber provides is beholding the philosophy of free enterprise, and we do welcome it. So congratulations on that. Just a little feedback from the last time I was at the dais. The second, I believe you will be addressing tonight, and that is a proposal to enter into the intergovernmental agreements with CSPAR and the school district for maintenance and repair on their vehicles. Combined, CSPAR and District 58 get about $23,000 worth of fleet maintenance and repair work done locally. One local shop who pays property tax and taxes and parts purchased in Downers Grove will have to find another way to make $18,000. It'll be missed for him in 2012. I do want to keep in mind, however, that we do again congratulate you on saving taxing bodies money. We all expect our taxing bodies to spend their money wisely. And again, we do defend the standards of free enterprise, and we expect a positive outcome from, should you move forward with this intergovernmental agreement. And thirdly, the manager's report tonight, I believe, unless it's changed, will include a proposal to process an extension for compliance on the sign ordinance. I believe the village staff has done extensive research on the compliance, and the chamber agrees with them and recognizes that our world was very, very different in 2005 when this ordinance was passed. And the chamber asks for your support on the staff's recommendation. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford, and as always, we appreciate hearing from the Chamber of Commerce because they're an important stakeholder in our community. We try to do our best to actually be proactive in getting your input, so it's acknowledged and recognized that almost without exception you are here at most of our meetings, and I think that demonstrates that continued good partnership between the village and the Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for your input. Just a couple of quick comments on both the electrical aggregation item as well as the proposal for the village to coordinate with District 58 and CSPAR with respect to servicing those public vehicles. To me, and I fully appreciate and trust me, I'm also a large proponent of free enterprise, but I think part of free enterprise is free choice. And both of these items, I think, lest there be any mistake, are really about providing choice. With the electrical aggregation, what we're doing is we're getting the item on the ballot so that the residents can vote on it. If they don't want to vote for it, they don't have to. And then even if they do approve the referendum, then there's even more choice. And that is one can either go the path of what the village may coordinate, and we're really just coordinating something because the ultimate provider of the service is not a government entity. It really comes from the private sector. All we're doing is creating a bargaining power that will allow for better rates to be had by those who may choose to participate in it. But they don't have to choose in it. There's an opt-out provision or an opt-in provision. And if they wanted to go with a different organization, a different bargaining tool, or nothing at all, again, they have the choice. So the reason why I think a lot of us here have been so vocally in favor of it is because it provides choice. And I think that's probably the biggest part of free enterprise is free choice. I think as Commissioner Waldeck put it, they actually get to vote on this twice. And then, of course, it's not even binding in terms of participating for the long term. So that's why I think that particular issue is not only advisable, but really something that's a win-win for everybody. With respect to the coordination, working with the District 58 and CSPAR, and having the village potentially service their vehicles, again, it's an issue of choice. As I understand it, I think it was made clear when we last talked about this, and I believe I saw some correspondence from District 58 on it. This doesn't mandate that District 58 or CSPAR service all their vehicles with the village. It gives them the opportunity to service their vehicles with the village. They can still go with anybody they would like, but for whatever reasons within their parameters, they decide to do it here because of lower cost, which of course results in lower cost for a taxing body. We all want to keep the cost of government down, get more value for our taxing dollars. That's a good thing, but if for other reasons, for speed or whatnot, they needed to do it so they can continue to provide high quality services, again, to our shared constituents, that's a good thing, but they're not required to do it. So I view that as also another opportunity to create more choice. And free choice, free enterprise are both good things. But we are cognizant of the balance that must be achieved when, on the one hand, you're trying to shrink the footprint of government, shrink the footprint of taxing bodies, and I think everybody in this room would be in favor of leaner, more efficient government, and yet also we want to make sure that we're not causing unintended consequences. So those comments from both today and last week are appreciated and duly noted. Any other questions or comments of a general nature before we move on with the rest of our agenda? Very good. Well, that brings us to item 5, which is public hearings. We do not have a public hearing tonight. And we can move right along to item 6, which is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Mayor, I believe one item has been removed from tonight's consent agenda. Item B, a resolution regarding the firefighter contract, has been removed. So we'd ask for a motion. It would be appropriate to ask for a motion for the agenda as amended.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm still in the old habit of having to do that by motion, so I was actually anticipating that, so my apologies. As the village manager explained, item B has been removed from the consent agenda for separate treatment. So the consent agenda, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, which would include items A, C, and D?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the council? Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to items A, C, and D on the consent agenda? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The consent agenda, inclusive of items A, C, and D, has been approved unanimously. Then I will ask for a motion to approve separately what was item B in the consent agenda, 6B. Is there a motion to authorize an agreement with the Downers Grove Professional Firefighters Union, Local 3235 of the International Association of Firefighters, AFL-CIO, CLC?
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to beg everybody's indulgence here tonight. This is a subject that has been going on for, I think, over a year now. I think about 13 months. Many of the discussions have been in closed session, as is appropriate for this matter. However, now that it's tonight that we're going to vote on this, I'd like to make sure the record reflects a few things. I will be voting against this contract. I will vote negative on it. Some time ago, and if you'll bear with me, I wrote some things down because there's a lot here and I want to make sure it comes out clearly. Some time ago, I advanced an idea that unfortunately we could not develop sufficiently to be part of this contract. My focus has been and will continue to be equitable treatment for all, sustainable, predictable, and reliable delivery of basic public services. A contract which provides for guaranteed compensation increases without consideration for the unpredictability of the future is, from my vantage point, irresponsible and doesn't meet the test of equitable, sustainable, or predictable. Let me be clear. Our public safety employees do a fantastic job. All evidence, anecdotal, statistical, technical, proves that. I've seen them in action myself, and I can say that with all confidence, our team are empathetic, compassionate professionals who go about their day in and day out business in an outstanding manner on behalf of all of us. But no amount of professionalism today can guarantee Village's future revenue streams. Particularly, we depend so heavily on sales tax revenue and state income tax redistribution. Despite all the work that's been done over the past couple of years by your village government team, we are nowhere near out of the woods. Some may argue the economy is leveling off, but when unemployment hovers around 10% and private sector wages have seen stagnation for several years such that real household income is in decline, I question that, and I'm skeptical of that. We've raised taxes twice in 2 years. We've reduced the number of village employees by 8 to 10%, and still, twice in the last 6 months, we've effectively punted a $3 million problem down the road. We do not have the funding for basic municipal services secured. We do not have the challenge that faced us 2 years ago sorted out. We talked a lot about how important this is, and we're not there yet, at least in my opinion. Sure, we're passing a balanced budget, but it's balanced by continuing to defer maintenance of our public assets. Property taxes being lowered, which we are doing this year, is not any sort of good time indicator, as but for some math manipulations in Springfield, we'd be raising them again this year. I hate sitting up here being Mr. Negative, and sometimes I feel like that's where I am. But I'm doing my job to the best of my ability. I do want our residents to be proud of our village and proud of those who work for our village. But that pride ought not equal a blank check, which in effect is what this contract is. Hyperbole to be sure, but future raises are guaranteed by the uninhibited ability of this body to raise property taxes, irrespective of the economic realities around us. Everybody from the private sector to the public sector will be working very hard to avoid that, there is no doubt. Ms. Crawford, Mr. Casa, our entire staff, and every private business enterprise person out there is going to be working real hard to make sure that those sales tax numbers increase and that more people are employed. But we're guaranteeing those raises regardless of the outcome of those efforts. We have arm wrestled and wrung our hands over the last couple of years over a couple of dollars a garbage sticker increase to avoid raising taxes on seniors. We've eliminated social programs with great angst. We've talked about the need to keep costs down at every turn. And we've asked other village employees to take furlough days and accept wage freezes. It's not equitable or fair to me to guarantee one segment of our population ever increasing compensation. Let me take the reverse for a moment. This contract is 1%, 2%, 2%. Those are the guaranteed raises. Those sound like low numbers, and they are. And one might say that from our side of the contract negotiations, we should be proud of that. but I'm not. If the cost of living increases next year more than 1%, we're effectively reducing the standard of living for our firefighters. I'm no happier about that than I am the idea of a guaranteed raise. If we do get that big economic turnaround and some historically typical inflation follows, our firefighters will again be sold short. That's not right either. I want nothing more than to have a great year, zero unemployment, doubling sales tax receipts, to be able to give substantial raises to all those who dedicate their careers to public service and at the same time rebate property taxes. But that isn't in the cards now. It's not even close. And I know no one who suggests it is in the cards for the next 3 years. There's no crystal ball that's going to solve this, but a contract which identifies raises, yet allows them to be revisited as a function of its structure, should some revenue targets not be met, is entirely reasonable in my mind and goes a long way to protecting both taxpayers and firefighters alike from uncertainty of the future. I would have liked to have thought we had learned from the last 2 years. Just because it's never been done that way doesn't mean it's wrong going forward. Folks that were watching a couple years ago saw us eliminate some public safety employees. I want to avoid that at all costs, but a contract like this could make that necessary in the future. We should be tying revenues to expenses. That should be a focus of every decision we make, I think. This contract sets the expenses of operating our fire department, and then hopes we'll have the necessary revenues to support them. And hope, to me, isn't a plan. Thus, I'll only support contracts which provide some sort of nexus between our non-property tax revenue streams and future compensation increases, as we do with most other contracts that this village engages in. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that I'll be in support of this, and I know that union contracts are often a big part of our job up here, and this particular one took a little bit of time, but I think we got to a spot where both sides can be equally happy. I think these aren't easy things to tackle. I've been on the other side, the employee side, for a number of years in my day job, and now being on the management side, it shows me a unique spectrum of the world, I guess, being on both sides of that equation. Anytime that an employee group and a management group get together and actually can come to a resolution without mediation, arbitration, I think that's a victory. Tonight we have an agreement that has obviously been approved by the Firefighter Association. Hopefully it will be approved here tonight by the Village Council. And I think it's a testament to the hard work of both the employee group and our staff for many hours of negotiations in good faith, trying to get to a resolution. So thank you to everyone involved. I appreciate all the hard work that was done to get to this point, and I will be again in support of this contract tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Rankin.
First of all, let me state that my vote on this matter has nothing to do with our firefighters and the high level of service they provide to our community, or the significant amount of time and effort our staff invested in negotiating this agreement. Negotiations with unions are done a certain way and most often don't vary from the norm. Commissioner Barnett suggested a contract that thought out of the box, that approached it differently. Years ago, I had a boss that that often said, I should say, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Commissioner Barnett's idea was to tie wage increases to the economy in the state of the village. I hope that we would have been able to make that concept a part of our contract, and we were unable to. So that's the problem I have with the contract. Wages aren't tied to the economy. There is no automatic opportunity to renegotiate wages if the economy descends again. That frankly scares me. When the economy was hit, the village's non-union employees weren't given raises and were asked to take furlough days. In that same tough economy, our contracted employees were receiving raises due to a contract that was negotiated in better times. As stewards of our residents' tax dollars, I think it's important to try to continue to explore this concept with future union contract negotiations. This has nothing to do with the people involved and the hard work that they do. It has everything to do with an effort to create change moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. I've experienced all sides of the labor management relationship. I've been non-union, union, several unions as a matter of fact, and I've been part of management. And much of the contract and the process is directed by laws and the process of labor negotiations that has a successful history of labor management law that goes back decades. Some people may look at the reports of this contract and see only the numbers, and whether or not they're good depends on where they are in the economy. If you're out of work or have employment insecurity or no raise, you may not be happy with what you read. But if you're secure in your employment, you've received a raise or bonus, you still might not be happy. That's just the nature of it. But this contract is much more than the numbers. The contract is negotiated, goes way beyond raises and various wage levels and steps. There's a lot of other things that are negotiated for the betterment of the village, and it's a good process. And our job is to look out for our residents and make sure that we're not overspending. And when you have a fire or someone who needs treatment while going to a hospital, that call is responded to by a group that is prepared, qualified, and has the tools to get the job done. That's our job. The union can speak for themselves, but you can be assured that just as we want to keep our residents safe and secure, they want their membership to be safe and secure as well. And I think we have a contract that meets those requirements, and that we now can move forward in a good relationship with each side's protected by a contract. And I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schnell.
I guess we're all going to say something tonight. I've sat up here for a long time, and I would like to congratulate our team and also the fire department's team, because I think in this instance, both sides negotiated in good faith. They negotiated in a means that allowed for our management's rights to be protected, but for also the employees' rights to be protected. And I think that's very important. I've seen contracts up here, I've seen negotiations since I've sat up here that weren't necessarily always friendly, nor were the results really good for either side. In this particular case, I think the outcome has benefits to both sides, as Commissioner Waldeck and Commissioner Neustadt said, and I will be supporting this. I think new ideas are always good, but I think new ideas need to be defined in such a way that everyone can understand those ideas, and I don't think that there was sufficient time in this particular process to allow for that definition to occur so that all sides could really understand what was being proposed. If we move forward in the future, perhaps we could take some time to help define that a little bit better, and maybe as we go into other negotiations, we'll be able to be more innovative. But in this case, I think it was very difficult to walk into a negotiation and try to create something new without really having the ability to fully explain it to all the parties. I think that, in some respects it's unfortunate, but I think the bottom line is that what we got, what our team negotiated, what their team negotiated, is good for all sides. People work hard. They have a right to be compensated for that. And in this particular case, the compensation is at a minimal increase, but I think it shows our employees that we care about them and that we think they're doing a good job and we value what they do for us. So I will be supporting this, and I just want to congratulate everybody involved because I think they all did a great job.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Turpin.
Yeah, I guess I will lay in. As I sat back and thought about this contract and the process that it's taken down the road and the discussions we had leading up to this moment tonight, I was one who was with Bob, or Commissioner Barnett, and looking for something not necessarily unique, but something that was a little bit different, that took away the guaranteed pay raises that he has spoken about. What bothers me is last 2 years, we've had employees that were not part of unions that did not get pay raises. They've taken furloughs, and union contracts were in place, and the salaries were adjusted accordingly per that contract. I would be in favor of supporting this if we had some sort of an out, that if we could not afford a pay raise across the board to all village employees, that we, the staff, presented to the public and to the unions that, hey, we don't have the finances to do so, then I would be in support of this. But because this is a standard traditional contract that I have seen the number of years that I've been up here with the different unions, I can't support this. Sure, everybody negotiated in good faith because everybody got the pay raise. And the employees are safe. I mean, we provide training, we do everything for them. They do a great job. I'm very proud of our fire department. I think we have the best around. I know we have the best equipment available to them for them to do their jobs. But I don't want to have to come back and have to look at doing layoffs because we have to do a pay raise or raise property taxes. So because of these issues, I will not be supporting this contract.
Thank you, Commissioner. I didn't come here tonight with any prepared comments on this, but I've been struck by some things that have been said. Let me make some observations because I want to make sure that, in all fairness, everybody up here knows exactly what happened, but I want to make sure that everybody out there understands the situation. I don't think anyone ought to take a vote for this contract as someone who didn't do their job or just simply said, well, let's just do the same old, same old. Everybody worked really hard, and everybody was creative and innovative and willing to consider new things and try to get the best result for this village. Make no mistake about that. On the other side, I also don't see a vote against this contract as someone who's anti-union or anti-fire department. I don't think that's true at all. I think what I instead see is our folks who are frustrated with the process and with the box. Because let's face it, folks, this isn't going to the car dealership and negotiating for a new car. What was the comment earlier, free enterprise? This is a very different situation. This is collective bargaining. And in collective bargaining, you work inside a box, the walls of which are not of your making. There are national labor laws. There are rules. There are things that we have to follow. And those stifle and prevent the kind of creativity and innovation that some of my colleagues were screaming for. I'm all for creativity and innovation, but the problem is you operate within a set of rules. And those rules are not dictated by this council. They're dictated by folks outside of this jurisdiction, but we have to adhere to them. And those have to be taken into account, and you have to work within them and achieve the best result you can. This is an outstanding result, and let me explain that to you. I just read the other day about the city of Naperville. The city of Naperville, about 3 times our size, a lot more employees, certainly they know how to negotiate a contract. They just approved a 2-year contract this week. It will be retroactive to May 1st. It's a 2-year contract, not a 3-year contract. 3 years better. That 2-year contract calls for a 3% increase in the first year and a 1% increase in the second year. This contract is better than what the city of Naperville could negotiate. And even those who voted against it, and that was a split vote, it was a 6-3 vote. Again, some of the same comments made by the dissenters there, very similar to what you're hearing here tonight, although I don't think they were being as creative as some of the people in this room. I don't think they have as good negotiators on both sides of the table as we do. I'm sure I'll get email about that. That's okay. I'll defend the folks within Downers Grove all day long. But even those that voted against it basically said that they thought it was as good a contract as they could get, one of the best contracts they'd ever seen. And ours is better than that one. So make no mistake, this is an outstanding result. It may not be the result that some folks wanted to see, but again, I think that's because of the box within which this has to happen. And I don't want anyone leaving this room thinking that it was because somebody fell down on the job. I don't think there are firefighters that fell down on the job. Firefighters are doing their job, the negotiators are doing their job, our staff's doing their job, this council did its job. I don't want anyone leaving this room thinking that anybody didn't do their job or that somehow didn't take this obligation seriously, because people worked very hard to get this outcome, but they have to work within that box. It's frustration with the box that I think you're hearing reflected tonight in the dissenting votes and the votes against the contract. That's what you're hearing tonight. Also keep in mind that when you have a proposal, it might be the most brilliant thing in the world, but all the people involved in the discussion have to agree that it's a brilliant proposal. This is, again, not a situation where one can unilaterally impose their will upon the others. That's the very antithesis of collective bargaining. It's a negotiation. And if you don't agree, someone will make the decision for you, eventually. And I think there was a recognition of that and the fact that this was an outstanding outcome. And I just gave you one example as to why that was the case. So I just wanted to make that clarification with respect to this outcome. And as it appears, I will be in support of it because it is an outstanding outcome. Would I like to see a different process that could allow us to do different things? You betcha. But those are laws that this body doesn't have the power to affect, at least not directly. I can't change that box by myself. All 7 of us can't change that box. The box has to change. And again, the votes against this contract, I think, are really votes against the circumstances in which this process takes place. Just a couple other quick things so there are no misconceptions. The contract is figured into our budget for 2012. Don't make any mistake. It is funded in the budget. It's not as though we're gambling that we're going to have revenues down the road to pay for this contract. That's not the case. Second of all, Commissioner Barnett made a good point, and that is that there is a $3 million issue that we need to address. But I also don't want anyone thinking that it's being ignored or that no one's doing their job or we're just kicking it down the road. Well, it's going to be addressed, folks. You better believe it. We're going to be doing that in short order in the next few months. Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tom LaCrone, 545 Chicago Avenue. I'd just like a couple of points of clarification. You don't have to give them to me tonight, but you mentioned this box, these laws that were hung into. Can you quote chapter and verse what Illinois law is it that we're talking about? I don't need it right now, but sometime when you can, so I can understand exactly what it is you're talking about. Because it sounds like you're boxed in to guaranteeing raises over the 3 years. That's
No,
probably a
that's not what I'm
misconception.
saying. What I'm saying
Okay,
is the
that's why
process is defined.
I want to know what the box is. The other thing is, what happened here tonight? We had a consent agenda which had 4 items on it, one of which was removed. But yet we're still acting on it during the consent agenda. Shouldn't it have moved to the active agenda?
Basically, it did.
Okay. But what, yeah, we're not, and the other thing is, so that people understand the ramifications is, our fire department is pretty well paid. If you look at what the salary structure is. Do we know, or can we quantify what 1% is, what 2% is? How many dollars are we talking about in total that increases will be? So we can get an idea of, okay, where's the money coming from? You know, what in it, it's funded, yes, in the 2012 budget. We haven't got to 2013 or 14 yet. So if that could be made available somehow so that the folks could know exactly what we're talking about. Thank you.
You're welcome. All that is reflected in the village's financial documents. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Bill Roble, 7800 Queens Court, Downers Grove. I've been watching council for many, many years, and I have taken notice of the remarks that were presented and the various positions that were advocated, pro and con. And I'm taken to the fact that everyone seems to be wanting to kick the can down the road. The box that you're talking about should have been addressed years ago with a constitutional convention in Springfield. The voters didn't understand it, so they kicked it down the road. The box that was presented to us, and I've heard people on the dais talk about that we have to pay into the pension plan so many dollars because it's mandated by the box. And you used the term tonight, the box. There's only one problem. Who maintains the box? And that falls right down here to Downers Grove. It's our box. If we haven't got the money to paint it, to support it, the box has to be changed. It has to be made smaller, has to be defunded, has to be reorganized. Ladies and gentlemen of the dais, now is the time. You can't be pushing it off forever. it's a problem here in Illinois. It's just compounded, and it's being addressed by other communities. If they can't afford a fire department, the village goes bankrupt. We possibly are thinking about that. If we're fortunate that we have a better organization, but there are villages in the metropolitan Chicago that have gone bankrupt because they cannot afford their fire department and they cannot afford their police department because they don't have the money. That's what I'm saying. There's someplace there has to be a compromise. Like you said, it's negotiated. You're very happy that it's only 1%, 2%, 2%. We're meeting in the minds. That's great, but it still avoids the major problem is the fact that we have to live within our means. And like Mr. Barnett said, Commissioner Barnett said, we don't know what we're going to have in our coffers next year or the year after, but we know it's going to cost us 2% more and 2% more. I think I've said enough. I think you get my point. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Romo. Let me add to my point, and that is, there are certain things we can't control, so we've been doing our best to take care of things that we can control. That's why you're seeing this council continue and staff continue to consider cooperation, collaboration, and consolidation with other bodies. That we can do. That's how we can reduce costs. That's how we make our own box, Mr. Roble. That's what this village council is doing. That's what this staff is trying to do every day. The departments we have in this village are working with other entities. For example, we're working with District 58 and CSPAR to try to reduce it. I can't change Washington. I can't change Springfield, not by myself. Maybe all of us collectively can, but what we can do is change the things in our town that we do have control over. So that's what we're trying to do as much as we can. But with respect to things that we can't control, processes that are laid out for us, dictated to us by Washington and by Springfield, yes, we have to work within those processes, but I'll tell you this, even within that process, this is a phenomenal outcome. Again, I hear you with respect to the process. I hear you with respect to the box. No argument there whatsoever. But even within that box, this is a very good outcome for this community. We're working on building our own box and trying to set the rules of the game in our favor. But thank you for your comments. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? Any final questions or comments from the council? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Nay.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passes 5-4. I'm sorry, 4-3. You got me thinking about Washington, the Supreme Court. Matter passes 4-3. And now, having moved from our quasi-active agenda, we'll go to our normal, regularly scheduled active agenda, which is item number 7. 7A, do I have a resolution to approve a final plat of subdivision for 2110 Prentice Drive?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt a resolution to approve the final plat of subdivision for 2110 Prentice Drive as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from the council? Questions or comments from anyone in the audience with respect to this matter? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passes unanimously. Do I have an ordinance to approve a final plan development amendment to plan development number 1 for an addition to the Prentice Creek Clubhouse?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the council? Any questions or comments from any members of the audience? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That matter passes unanimously. Brings us to item 7C. Do I have a motion to authorize a redevelopment sales tax rebate agreement with Bentley of Downers Grove?
Mayor Tully, I move to authorize a redevelopment sales tax agreement with Bentley of Downers Grove as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from the council? Any questions or comments from Commissioner Waldeck?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a number of concerns last week that haven't totally been alleviated, but some agreements work, some not so much. Luxury Motors, Sara Lee, maybe not so much. I could say that over the last few years, There's been a lot of praise for the glories of the free market, which is short for free from government intervention or interference market. Simply put, you just can't proclaim the free market argument and vote for deals like this. You can't. They are mutually exclusive. This is market intervention at its peak, and Downers Grove is open for business. We have agreements that, like I said, we have agreements that work well. Some have fallen short. We only hope that Bentley will be a good corporate citizen, sell lots of cars, and choose to remain and make both of us lots of money. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the council? I'll just add one thing you made me think of, Commissioner Waldeck, and that is the free market, the very essence of the free market is hearty competition. And if anyone thinks for a moment there isn't a lot of competition amongst municipalities for businesses that can keep their sales tax base alive and well, then you haven't been reading the Tribune or watching TV in the last couple of weeks. We have to vigorously maintain what we have and work constantly to attract new, vibrant enhancements to our economic base. That's how we keep our rate down. Keep the rate up, and keep the base up, try to keep the rate down. So things that we can do that are responsible and that ultimately are the benefit of the village, I think, are not only worth pursuing, but I think worth supporting. And again, I'll thank those who are involved in making sure that this is one source of revenue that stays in the village of Downers Grove and not somewhere else. Any questions or comments from anyone in the audience on this item? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. And it passes unanimously. Moves to 7D on our agenda. Do I have a motion to authorize an agreement with Southeast Association for Special Parks and Recreation regarding maintenance and repair of vehicles?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing execution of an agreement between the Village of Downers Grove and Southeast Association for Special Parks and Recreation regarding the maintenance and repair of vehicles as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the council? Commissioner Waldeck.
Once again, over the last few years, much has been said, not only about the free market, but I also had to hear a lot of praise for the free market and for privatization. For example, we privatized things that we were doing in the past that, when privatized, actually cost more and provided less service, and some of it in the name of core services. I had to laugh when someone, when it was published recently, that someone commented that we were expanding our core services with these agreements. I'm also happy to see that the bad rap government gets for inefficiency is unearned. This one is an example of government being able to do something that the private sector can do, but can do it better, faster, and cheaper so that taxpayers of several entities can benefit. And I'll also give credit to Laura Crawford of our chamber for putting what we are doing out there. If privatization and the free market works, time will tell. And if there's another company out there, one of our businesses that can do it better, I hope they will come forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from the council on this item? Commissioner Barnett?
Yeah, I'm going to be voting against this for the same reasons I expressed last week. I'm going to draw everybody back for a moment, too, to the natural gas discussion with our natural gas fueling station that we had a year or so ago. You know, one way to be efficient, government can certainly be efficient if they aren't required to do things like pay dividends or generate a profit or depreciate facilities or plan for the future or operate a sales and marketing team. That's not too difficult. I suspect just about any business that's out there could be done theoretically less expensively by a government entity who didn't have those burdens placed on it. I understand what's going on here, and I want to say a couple things positively. I really do thank our staff for getting into this and for identifying it as an opportunity and for trying to find a way to make it work. That is exactly the kind of work that we need to have done every day, and I hope we do more of it. That said, it seems to me that we're not far enough along with the idea of could we be out of much of this business. We're talking about adding a couple hundred hours max, which certainly isn't a lot, but at the same rate, at the same time, that differential then, those hours times the differential in cost is also pretty minimal too. So the very real savings to 58 or C-SPAR is either understated in our documentation or borderline insignificant. And I'm wondering what we're going to do, if anything, with Darien. So at this point, for me, the subject matter is not developed enough for me to think this is a good idea, and I'll be voting against it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments for the council? Just again, not to repeat, and these comments apply to the next item as well with respect to the similar agreement with District 58. I am appreciative of the fact that not all combinations or consolidations make sense. They need to make sense on a global basis. They need to make sense for all stakeholders involved. Clearly, where we can reduce the cost of government, that's a good thing and should be pursued. Clearly, as I said earlier, where we can actually seize our own destiny by the reins and do something by working with other taxing bodies to try to collaborate, cooperate, communicate better, consolidate where we can, and become more efficient, reduce the footprint of government, reduce the ultimate tax burden to our residents, that's something that no one should disagree with. I agree that we ought to be mindful of two very important things. One, what is the overall impact upon the rest of the community? And second of all, there is that threshold question. Commissioner Barnett's absolutely right. With every one of these analyses, the question should first be, is this something we should be doing at all before combining with someone else? Can it be done even more efficiently outside of the organization altogether? I agree with that question being asked on every occasion, and know that we will continue to do so. But this is also something new. This is also something different, and I'm being very mindful of my colleagues' comments earlier about if you do the same thing over and over again, you'll get the same result. We're doing something different. Make no mistake about it. But if we're really going to affect change, we need to take these steps and make these changes and try these different approaches. And that's what we're trying to do. So I'm in favor of this, and hopefully it will lead to even more significant consolidations, combinations that will generate future savings as we go forward. And I think having these conversations and trying these out, seeing how they work is a big first step towards that ultimate goal. Any questions or comments from anyone in the audience with respect to this item? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passes 6-1. Brings us to item 7E. Do I have a motion to authorize an intergovernmental agreement with the Board of Education of Downers Grove School District 58 regarding maintenance and repair of school district vehicles?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement between the Village of Downers Grove, the Board of Education of Downers Grove School District 58 regarding the maintenance and repair of school district vehicles as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from council? I think we all said them already.
I'm not going to repeat anything, but with tongue firmly in cheek, I'll remind everybody these two contracts have out clauses in them.
Sorry, what?
Out clauses.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passes 6-1. Brings us to item 7F. Do I have a motion to approve an ordinance for the 2011 aggregate tax levy?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the council? I'll just simply mention that I think most of the items for the balance of this agenda have been discussed in multiple prior public meetings. So if there's an absence of comment at this point, don't take that as anything more than we've discussed this at numerous public meetings, and there have been many comments and questions in advance. Any questions or comments from members of the audience on this item? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell?
That was an aye.
That was an aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passes unanimously. Brings us to 7G. Do I have a motion to approve an ordinance levying of taxes for the fiscal year commencing on the first day of January 2011? Special Service Area Number 2.
Mayor Tully, I moved to adopt an ordinance for the levying of taxes for the fiscal year commencing on the first day of January 2011 and ending on the 31st day of December 2011 for the Village of Downers Grove, Special Service Area Number 2, Downers Grove Downtown Service Area as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments? Any questions or comments from the audience on this item? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, motion passed unanimously. Move to 7H. Do I have a motion approving an ordinance for the levying of taxes for fiscal year commencing on the first day of January 2011 with respect to Special Service Area Number 3?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance for the levying of tax fiscal year commencing on the first day of January 2011 and ending on the 31st day of December 2011 for Village of Downers Grove Special Service Area Number 3, Prince Pond Special Service Area as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from the council? Questions or comments from the audience? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter passed unanimously. Speaking of consolidation, I'm going to suggest that we take related items I through O on our active agenda. Those would be items 7I through O, all which relate to abating a portion of the 2011 tax levy with respect to various different bonds. And again, abatements are something that we levy, and then an abatement means you don't collect it. These would be items 7I through O. Do I have a motion to adopt ordinances 00-04725 through 00-04731 as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments from anyone on the council with respect to any of these items? Questions from the audience with respect to any of these items? Collective roll call, please.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Schnell? Mayor Tully?
Aye. Those matters have all been approved unanimously. That ends our active agenda, even with the extra special edition, and brings us to item number 8, which is our first reading portion of our agenda, which is sort of like the workshop part. This is where items are presented for discussion for the first time and will be voted upon at a later date. So as is customary, I will turn over the discussion to Village Manager Fieldman to present both items A and B under item 8 on our agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. I will actually ask our Public Works Director, Nan Newland, to come forward to present both items. The first is consideration of an ordinance that would restrict vehicle movements on Webster Street near 55th Street. And here to present this item is our Public Works Director, Nan Newland.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This item was initially addressed to staff by residents of Webster Street. During the 2010 neighborhood traffic study early this year, this map shows the area that was included in the study and the location of Webster Street in the southwest area of the neighborhood. This shows Webster Street in relation to 55th Street, which is to the south, which is a county road, and Main Street to the west, which is a village street. Staff received communications from the residents of Webster Street regarding safety concerns due to sight distance limitations at 55th Street and concerns about cut-through traffic. The residents requested a complete road closure of Webster Street at 55th Street. This item was initially presented and discussed at the May 2011 Transportation and Parking Commission and again in November by the Commission. Staff reviewed this intersection and found the following. The sight distance for southbound Webster Street traffic at 55th for left, through, and right turns movements is less than the minimum recommended for the design speed limits on 55th Street. The traffic volumes on this street, on Webster Street, are significantly lower than for average residential streets, with about 230 vehicles per day on the street. The 85th percentile speed on Webster Street was just over 29 miles per hour, which is in line with the speeds, the 85th percentile speeds on other neighborhood streets and streets in this neighborhood. And although this sight distance limitation has occurred for many years, there has not been a higher than average number of vehicle crashes in the vicinity of the intersection during the past 3 years when we reviewed the accident history. To To improve safety at the intersection, staff reviewed 6 possible alternate solutions, including 3 that restrict turn movements by regulations, signage, and enforcement, and 3 that restrict turn movements by installing physical barriers. I know this is very hard to see. This was an exhibit that was prepared when we talked with the neighborhood and also made our presentation at TAP. Although we have the 3 on the left-hand side are the 3 that are by signage, and the 3 on the right, are the 3 that include physical barriers being constructed. Although we have not done any detailed engineering on these alternatives, we know that the physical barriers would involve construction within the county's right-of-way and would need to meet the county's design standards, which would require land acquisition because it is a very narrow right-of-way. It's only a 50-foot wide right-of-way for that street at 55th Street. Based on our review of the alternates, staff recommends and recommended at the TAP meeting implementing turn restrictions, which is alternate 3 in our recommendations, for southbound Webster Street traffic at 55th Street so that only right turns will be permitted and all other turns will be prohibited. In addition, staff requested and DuPage County has installed warning signs on 55th Street to alert motorists of the approaching intersection at Webster Street. Early in 2012, DuPage County and the village will begin a Phase 1 engineering study for future improvements of 55th and Main, which will include a comprehensive intersection improvement with lane widening and traffic signal modifications. And we are currently defining the scope of the study and are including the intersection of Webster Street and 55th Street as part of that design and analysis for the larger intersection study. This recommendation was recently reviewed and was presented and reviewed by the Transportation and Parking Commission at their November 16th meeting, and the commission voted for, with 1 member abstaining, to approve staff's recommendation as presented. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from the council? Actually, I'll start off, I won't make a comment, but just I'll put it out there. I actually own property within 100 feet of the affected area here, so I'll just tell everybody that right off the bat. I don't think it affects my discussion here tonight, but so everybody knows. Questions or questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. We've had a lot of very respectful and positive commentary from this neighborhood group, and I appreciate their involvement in actually getting some data and opinions to us. I think these steps are kind of what we normally do with the signage first, and seeing that last bullet on the screen now that there will be a intersection analysis with the county, I think is an important note to make because, as Nan said, the county controls a large portion of the right-of-way. So any of the desired outcomes that the residents may have will need to be done with the county. So signage is a start. I think we can continue to work with these residents and these neighbors and then now the county to come up with the best option, but we have to be very cognizant of not only what we do on Webster, but how that translates to the rest of the village as well. 230 cars on a street isn't a heck of a lot of cars when you look at some of the other roadways in town. So we have to be we have to be mindful of that as we make the decisions about this street. So again, I appreciate all the comments. I think I spoke to 3 or 4 of the neighbors on that block and have visited the block myself, and look forward to seeing how these signs work and some of the next steps that come from the engineering analysis. That'll be this spring or summerish?
We'll be starting this spring. It'll probably take about a year. It is IDOT and federal funding. So there'll be a lot of public involvement, workshops, opportunity for people to make comments and review plans as we go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rankin?
I wanted to thank staff for giving a little more information about the site distance for if you're turning left onto Webster while going east on 55th. And the report said that it's unsafe site distance. The other thing I wanted to say is that short length of Webster, I mean, I don't know how many houses are on that street, but when you say there's 230 cars and there's only a dozen houses, that seems significant for the short length of the street. It's not like a longer street length. I don't know if I'm being clear, but I think that's something to take into consideration too. That's the only question I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Schnell.
I agree with Commissioner Newstead, and I think the first step is always to try signage. If signage doesn't work, then we can try something else. The key, like in everything else with signage, is enforcement and warning or letting people know that there are turn restrictions before they actually get to the intersection, so we don't create more havoc than is already there. 250 cars doesn't sound like a lot of cars unless you're confused as to what they are allowed to do or not do in the neighborhood. So I think pre-signage, especially in the beginning, is important, and then enforcement is going to be a key. I don't know how we're going to do it or when we're going to do it, but you know, letting the neighborhood know what's going on, letting the neighborhood know what's going to be enforced and how, I think is very, very important and really needs to be done for at least the first month or so that people get into the new habit of doing what they're supposed to be doing according to the new signage. So if we could make sure that that's implemented, that I think is going to be the key to making this work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Did we look at the turns into Webster? It seems like everything I'm looking at is focused on turns out of Webster onto 55th.
We did also look at the sight distance if you're on 55th Street turning onto Webster as well. And that is below the standard, the design standard for turn movements.
So that,
And it has been for years and years.
sure. You know, this, I get frustrated, is probably the best choice of words, when we refer to situations like that. And I don't mean any offense, man, to anybody in your staff or on our staff, but we've done it that way, and we haven't had a problem. Is not the same as if we had our choice, we'd set it up that way. They're distinctly different commentaries on any specific situation. And 250 cars, I got to agree with Commissioner Rankin, that's a whole ton of cars. What that means is it's cut-through traffic is very real. I mean, that means that 200 cars a day are cutting through a neighborhood with someplace else to go other than Webster Street. And I am trying to figure out, if I look at this, what seems to be the preferred alternative from the residents on Webster Street, which is to close it, and we talk about the pros, some stuff missing, I think. Addresses the intersection site deficiency, yeah, and the physical barrier certainly, but it also eliminates cut through traffic, and it also reduces the total vehicle count in the neighborhood, and it likely improves that neighborhood as a residential neighborhood, given that probably 200 cars a day who don't live there are using it as a way around a stoplight or around a lousy turn at Washington and 55th. I'm an advocate for, will continue to be, a general village-wide philosophy that I don't think we embrace yet, maybe we won't ever, but won't come as a surprise to those who are paying attention from me, that we are trying to eliminate cut-through traffic with physical barriers. We've got signs all over town that there are people screwing around with all the time. I drive, of course, everybody knows Maple Avenue all the time. In the last, I don't know, since it's been closed, I've seen at least a dozen people going westbound on the little area that's now one-way eastbound. Just doing it. That doesn't solve a thing, and so to put a few signs up that make it less likely, I don't know. I remember when we were first talking about Washington Street and talking about trying to really limit people on Washington. That's a huge volume difference on Washington, and we thought limits there were good. I don't see why we'd want anybody on purpose turning onto 55th Street off of Webster if we could avoid it. It doesn't make any sense to me. 55th has got lousy sight lines, and it's 35, which means everyone's going 50. So even if we tell them you can only go right, there's going to be people that go left, and the ones that are going right are doing it in a lousy environment. Same with turning the other direction. And the idea that the county's going to put up signs that say, watch out, there's an intersection up here. There's one every, 400 feet. I'm disappointed. I really think we should be trying to pursue closure of Webster and any other streets where the residents think it's acceptable. And I think certainly some residents in some neighborhoods would say they don't want their street closed. But my understanding is everybody in the neighborhood would like to see this, and I hate the idea that we're going to put a few signs up and hope to revisit it someday. That doesn't seem like enough for me. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, as mentioned, I own property within 100 feet of the affected portion of Webster and very familiar with it. And it's a no-brainer that something had to be done with respect to the site distance issue, because if you're headed south on Webster and you come to the 55th and you turn west, yeah, it's a challenge. There's no question about it, which is why I don't turn right when I go there. Even turning, well, you don't turn, well, you can turn right, that's easier. Turning left is the real problem to head east because of the site distance. But, I mean, it's essentially a form of a blind hill, and the problem I have is there are blind hills all over town. I just moved from one block that had 2 of them, and I guarantee you that there were talks at our annual block party about pulling the mayor daily in the middle of the night, just closing the street ourselves because we thought it was dangerous. And the problem is I think has been hit up upon some of my colleagues, is that there are numerous stretches of street in town where the neighborhood feels exactly the same. And that's really the challenge, is you're not just talking about one street. Some people might say, well, what's the big deal? Let's just do it. There's dozens and dozens and dozens, and then it becomes a cost issue, and then we get back to talking about maintaining what we have before creating something new to maintain. And also matters of equity and fairness, and how do you objectively determine who goes first, and all those different things that come into it. And again, just because it's difficult doesn't mean that you don't do it. But I think that what's been proposed is a recognition that there is an issue. A step is being taken to try to mitigate that issue. And it is obviously going to remain high on the radar screen, and if more drastic measures are necessary, then there will be objective evidence that will demonstrate that will set this stretch of street apart from, say, Fairmount down the block, or even Mackey. That's a cut-through street, and there's lots of cut-through streets. The other problem with cut-through streets is if you close one cut-through street, you know what happens. All the traffic moves to the next street, and then you have that block here asking for the very same thing. That is an experience that we know from decades of dealing with parking around both of the high schools. The minute you deal with one street, everybody just moves to another street. So I agree, it's a village-wide issue that has to be addressed on a comprehensive basis. But how you do that with equity and fairness and without bankrupting yourself, those are the challenges. So I'm fully cognizant of the issue there, having experienced it myself. But again, I've experienced it in many parts of town, and there's probably a lot of people sitting in the audience right now that could say, well, you know, actually, I'd like to have my street closed too. So we need to, in fairness, be objective with criteria. And one of the things that I know the neighbors take issue with is the average number of, you know, the average traffic volume on Webster being actually, according to the counts that were done, lower than what is the average for residential streets. Now, to me, that means we have to measure it again at the appropriate point in time and make sure that that's not just an aberration. But these are the kind of objective criteria that can cause all kinds of problems. If somebody with a different number says, well, wait a minute, how come I'm not getting my street closed? Those are the challenges. Nobody wants to be Solomon up here. So I think this is a good start. I don't think anyone's going to forget about this. I don't think the neighbors in Webster are going to let us forget about it. And I haven't made up my mind completely, but I think that certainly this is a no-brainer. But I think you just need to be careful and take into account the number of factors I mentioned before doing something that's more permanent. The one thing I will also add is I want to thank everybody on Summit and on Webster who have been communicating with the council, because I think everyone's been very well organized. I think they've been very communicative. I think they've been very good about appearing and commenting both at meetings and through other forms of communication. Nice job of representing your neighborhood, and that's exactly the way to get it done in terms of getting everyone's attention, even if it ultimately doesn't result in the outcome that you want, although we're not voting on anything tonight, so we're going to hear what everyone has to say, we're going to continue this conversation, and it will be up for a decision at a later point in time. But those are just sort of my initial thoughts. Is I agree something needs to be done, maybe something more, not sure, but I'm also very mindful of a lot of different competing interests. Commissioner Rankin?
I forgot to mention a few things that I wanted to get out there. So of all the different site distance measurements, the only safe way that doesn't have a site distance issue is to turn right onto Webster going westbound on 55th, right?
Correct.
And so the alternate number 3 is still giving a solution that has a sight distance issue, right?
Which is the left turn in from 55th. 55th Street is under the county's jurisdiction, and to restrict left turn from there wouldn't be the village restricting it, it'd be the county restricting it. And we have talked to them, they are very well aware of the issue, and their preference is to look at it as part of the bigger picture, because it's so close to the intersection with Main and 55th, they're going to be looking at that whole area. They're going to be bringing in a traffic consultant to look at the whole thing, and they'd like to look at that as part of that intersection.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to say, staff agrees, and we're very committed to addressing cut-through traffic issues. I think there's different ways to approach that, and we're very pleased to have received the funding to improve 55th and Main, because I think the improvements like that reduce congestion at the intersections and keep drivers on those main thoroughfares. I think our commitment to working on those main arterial streets really goes a long way. In the long term, I know it doesn't solve the problem today, but I think in the long term, we're very committed to working on those longer term projects that we think will have a lot of those benefits.
Commissioner Barnett?
As long as we're in the workshop mode here, there are undoubtedly problems all over town. And if that says anything to me, it says that we have a problem we ought to start actually physically doing something about. To suggest that we're not going to sit up here and be solemn, that's exactly what we're going to be. That's exactly what we have to be. Whether it's Mackey or it's Webster, it's certainly not Maine. Fairmount is certainly not Fairview. The question that I think we ought to be answering before we answer a question of signage versus not and county versus not is what is our intended long-term environment that we're creating? Because you're right, Mayor, there's going to be situations all over town, but if we got to the point where we said we want to do these things but we can't afford to do them, then not unlike stormwater or anything else that the village has undertaken over the decades, you could make an appeal to residents and ask them how important it was to them. If we say we don't have money, we don't have money, we don't have money, and there's too many people asking, then what we do is nothing. And we've got neighborhood after neighborhood. Maybe I'm the only guy that draws the comments, but when I'm talking to people, I hear, the only thing I hear, other than, don't raise my taxes because nobody likes that, but the only specific subject anybody brings up repetitively over and over and over again is how lousy traffic is in town. And I don't know that I guess I'm skeptical that we have to wait and have the county tell us exactly what 55th and Main ought to look like to not know the answer that, probably Webster Street doesn't make a lot of sense that close to an intersection that's handling that kind of volume that, oh yeah, by the way, the county and Downers Grove are trying to increase volume on. We have a lot of tax dollars that we spend on downtown management and on EDC to try and drive people to this town, to beg them to come here. We keep bragging periodically that our population doubles during the day, and that's awesome. But where are we putting all those cars? I mean, are we just sort of hoping that they don't bother people too much? Anecdotally, suggesting that if there's a big enough problem, we'll have to react. We'll put a sign there, and then I don't know why we would be hoping that there's a problem that causes us to react. It's a question, in my mind, that we can't answer with Webster, but I think I'm going to be pressing us in the coming year to talk about, which is a bigger philosophy about traffic through the village. I can't imagine that we have to create an engineering study every time we think that we've got a traffic problem. We got good people who know exactly how to solve it if we were taking ourselves into the position of blank slate of paper, no money, no county, what would we want to do? If somebody was going to say, listen, because the county's not going to let us, or because they're going to change it, we want to put a sign in for now because we hate to spend money having it torn up later. Well, that's one thing, but I haven't heard anybody say that. I've heard everybody say that we're kind of afraid to get into something too deep, but at least that's what it feels like. So it's probably not a fair criticism, but it's definitely where my mind is on this thing, and I'm stinging a little bit from what seems to me to be a sequence of these kinds of events. So I'm really hopeful that we'll keep the foot down on traffic calming, because I think it's the single biggest issue that affects every resident in town.
No, the biggest issue is actually the condition of the roads, which sort of act as traffic calming if you think about it. The minute they get cleaned up, that's what people feel like they can drive faster. But just to follow up, I'm not suggesting that we do nothing. In fact, that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that we are doing something. It may not be the something that everybody wants, it may not be the something everybody wants today. Well, I don't hear anybody suggesting we do nothing. And I don't hear anybody suggesting that we shouldn't study traffic on a more comprehensive basis.
What we're saying is we're going to throw up a sign, hope that people pay attention, do what we can to enforce it, and still create an environment, as Commissioner Rankin pointed out, where we know that existing terms permitted under the new signage are still not safe.
Well, but
That's not a real great
But you also
effort.
have to look at it, when I said Solomon, Solomon is famous for a story where basically he brought about a resolution of a very difficult issue by giving people an impossible choice. That's what we don't do. What we do is we try to give people criteria. We try to give people reason, basis for making a decision. And the concern I have is, at least with the data that's been presented, I got to call into question, you want to talk about raising criticism. Lower traffic volume than on average? But yes, we have a site distance issue. So if the site distance issue is the problem, then we got to address it. I'm not saying that this is the only way it should be addressed. I'm understanding that this is start with actually the principle called Occam's razor. Start with the simplest solution first to see if it works before you move to something greater. That's all that's being proposed here. No one's suggesting we do nothing. Nobody's suggesting that we ignore it. No one's suggesting that we put up a sign and run away. I think those are unfair characterizations. What I'm suggesting is that we have a comprehensive, fair, and equitable system that lets everyone understand why are you doing this street and not another street, and why are you doing their street before my street. Because otherwise we invite a lot of criticism. And again, no one's suggesting we do nothing. We're not doing nothing. Commissioner Schnell.
I guess I agree with everything that's been said up here, and that this is a village-wide issue. But I go back to discussions that have been had, I can't tell you how many years ago, but one was between Maine and Fairview from 39th south to Ogden, and there was a traffic study that was done there. And there was desires to have certain streets closed within the neighborhood, again, because of increased volumes, trying to make it safer for kids to go to school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The problem was, if you close Street X, similar to what Commissioner Neustadt was talking about, then that traffic goes on Street Y. And then the people on Y don't like it because all of a sudden they have more traffic, so they want it closed, and they want, and it becomes almost a domino effect, because which street do you choose that's going to all of a sudden get a lot more traffic? We had it between Bennard, Downers Drive, and Bel Air. And when they wanted to, we're thinking about putting a traffic signal in. Which one got the traffic signal, and which ones got closed, and who got all the traffic? And, invariably you had the residents on the street that might get all the traffic saying, we don't want it, we want our street closed because it should be over there. It has to be done as the mayor was saying, in an equitable way. The whole neighborhood has to be looked at, and then discussions really have to be had as to which of the streets can handle the increase in traffic, which ones really equitably, if you want to use that term, need to be closed, if at all. It's not an easy, simple solution. It sounds like an easy, simple solution. People want to close. I can sympathize with them wanting it closed. It's a dangerous situation that they perceive. Site distance, you name it, all these problems, but there's streets all over the community. They have the same thing. How do you decide which ones get closed? How do you decide which ones get more traffic? There is not a simple solution to this. And
or maybe we do, but at least we have some kind of a objective criteria that says this is why, and maybe that's the way to go. I don't have a problem with that. I just have a problem doing it in a piecemeal fashion.
Well, but again, it's
Really.
It's a very difficult thing. You can't just close one without it having an effect on another one or another two or another three, because it's a domino effect through the neighborhood. And I agree, we've got to do something, but I think we also need to take it slowly. Start with a sign. If the sign doesn't work, then go to the next step. But you can't just close 4 or 5 streets in a neighborhood and channel all of the traffic onto one street in that neighborhood, because, trust me, those people will be up here yelling and screaming about the fact how dangerous it's become for their kids. So, 23 years, I think we've been wrestling with this same question in different neighborhoods, and right now we're discussing this neighborhood, and I understand there's a problem. But I don't know what the answer is. I just know that the problem is very difficult to solve. And I think we need to be very cognizant of the fact that when you solve one problem, you may be making 12 others for the neighborhood. So we've got to tread softly and make sure that it's fair to everyone.
There's no doubt that we're going to, anything we do, it pushes cars someplace else. It absolutely is the case. I guess what I'm struggling with is if we sat here and said we're going to close Webster Street and we're going to push cars somewhere else, was anybody up here suggesting they wouldn't better be on Main or Washington? I mean, I don't know that we need a county engineering study to tell us that 200 cut-through cars would be better served to be on Washington or Main.
They won't be on Main or Washington, they'll be on some other side street.
Yeah, sure.
They'll be on
And I
Fairmont.
think that's
they'll
the
be on-
problem.
They will,
they'll be
you're
on
right.
Summit, they'll be on.
Yeah.
All right. No, I'll finally chime in here. I think it is a tough question, and I attended, I believe I attended maybe the first TAP meeting on this particular issue, and I believe the neighboring street had something like over, you think 250 cars is a lot. I think the next large street over had over 800 cars in the same time period. So now you're possibly adding 250 to that 800. I think what we have is a process. I think we're going to have the sign. It's going to be hopefully a little safer for at least a while. We try it. The key here, I think, is that the county is going to check into it. I'm kind of disappointed that it takes a whole year. I'm sure we can try and push it if we can. And then once the county and our staff works together to come up with some choices or some solutions, it'll go through the process. It'll go through TAP. It'll come to us. So whatever solution we come up with, I think will be reasonable. Hopefully it'll solve the problem. I have a feeling that it'll probably be somewhere less than the closing the street. Maybe it will turn into that. But at least we will have known that we put forth the effort and that we gave it a good process, and we should be confident in what the final result will be, rather than just taking things over and plugging streets and like everybody else. I mean, everybody's come up here is valued, and we'll hear from the neighborhood again. We'll hear from TAP. We'll hear from the county. So there's plenty more to go on this one. So in the meantime, I think it's incumbent on the drivers who do use Webster. You have site problems there. You come to a point where if you're going to cross 55th Street, you just don't kind of close your eyes and step on the gas if it's dangerous. Take another route. People need to be responsible drivers too. So we're doing what we can with this, and I think we'll have a good process.
What is anticipated will happen in 6 to 9 months when, hypothetically speaking, a sign goes in, and there's 6 to 9 months of data? Is it going to come back to Transportation and Parking to review whether there has been an appreciable improvement, and then, based on that, some sort of report for either further action or it seems to be working?
We just want to establish a checkpoint that we'll go back and look at the data again. We'll pull up all the crash data for that year. We'll also
I hope
touch.
there won't be any crashes in the next 6 to 9
Well,
months.
whatever there is, we'll check into the records, see if there is anything. We'll touch base with TAP again in the neighborhood. We just wanted to emphasize the fact that we'll continue to watch it and establish a time that we'll check back in.
And allow us to give feedback to the county engineers, and their consulting staff will be working on the design. It's a good time frame to check in because they'll be nearing their recommendations at that point.
Because one of the things that, going back to the subjective criteria is if you can justify to some other street that, hey, we tried the less intrusive methods and they didn't work. And so, you know what, your block has to go through the same less intrusive methods, and if we have objective criteria, actual evidence that shows it's not working, that's why we move to the next phase. Now, that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. I'm not saying that we just take the Band-Aid approach, and I'm not suggesting this is a Band-Aid and ignore it, but that you do try the simplest approach, and if that's successful, hallelujah. If it's not, okay, then you need to do something else, and that's why I'm asking what the process is contemplated to be, so that this isn't just, okay, whatever we end up doing when we act on this in the next few weeks, that's the end of the road, no pun intended.
We include that as a report to TAP as a feedback on projects. We regularly update them on projects they've discussed each month.
All right, here's another dumb question that's completely unfair. So in other places where I mean, are there other examples around town where this solution, and I know no street is the same, I understand that. So with that caveat, are there other situations where we can look to and say, this solution actually had an appreciable benefit at some other spot in town, which previously had been experiencing similar problems? I don't need an answer to that right now, but that would be something that would be useful to know.
We can provide
Because
that.
we actually have demonstrated evidence that, in fact, the sign does work in similar situations, and then we'll see if it works here. And I realize every area is different, they're all unique, I get that. But that would be helpful to my analysis. If we can look at some other situations where it's in fact worked as opposed to if it's never worked, well, I'd like to know that too.
Okay.
Mayor, I have one last question, if that's all right.
Workshop, go for it.
I did have one comment from a resident about the crash information. The residents seem to think that there are more crashes in that area than were listed. A suggestion was made that perhaps we could look at crashes occurring on 55th Street rather than on Webster. I may have seen that information here, but if not, could we start adding that to the documentation so we have maybe a better idea of what the crashes look like over the years?
We will.
Thank you.
Questions or comments from the audience with respect to this item? Please come down to the podium, give us your name and address, and we welcome your comments. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Mike Ruda, 5405 Webster Street. I've got, pass it on. I'm here on behalf of the residents, my neighbors and friends of the 5400 block of Webster, several of whom are out of town on business or other obligations. They weren't able to make it here tonight. Basically, we've prepared an informational packet describing why our situation is unique. And basically, this packet kind of represents about 2 years of collaboration between the neighborhood residents, the village, Public Works, and others. Giving you a table of contents, some different figures and stuff like that here. It's my every intention to take less than 5 minutes to explain this, or I guess paraphrase it quickly. But if I go over, please call me on it. Webster Street is unique because we are the only street in between Main and Washington. And I think when somebody says we need to look at things objectively, every street is different. But realistically, you know, we're kind of sandwiched by two of the big main streets, two of the only streets that are actually through streets that can cross the railroad tracks. I think that's something that needs to be considered. If you turn to the second page, I've kind of just thrown, I guess, 10 key bullet points here. Number one, the cut-through traffic on Webster from vehicles heading west on 55th continue to be a problem. And generally what happens is when the cars get stuck at the red light, drivers choose to turn right to kind of circumvent that light. They then go left on Summit, then onto Main Street. And this is something that we see as, you know, if the street were blocked off, it's not going to go elsewhere. These cars are turning because they see an easy way out. They see a way to get around that light. Data presented by Public Works basically supports that. As Ms. Newland suggested earlier, or presented earlier, 75% of that traffic on Webster is moving northbound. It's a factor of 3 to 1. 170 to 50, roughly, of cars headed northbound versus southbound. We have 14 houses on Webster, you know, one of which is unoccupied, but if you figure 2 cars per house, 2 trips per day, you're looking at about 60, you know, roughly 60 cars. Points, what is it, 2 through 4 are basically about the site distance. And, you know, through Public Works and through some work of our own, we know that it's absolutely unsafe based on engineering standards to turn off of Webster onto 55th in any direction. We did request that Public Works measure turning into Webster from 55th, making a left turn. At the May meeting, we were told that that was not really, they didn't see it as an issue. It's nice to hear that they actually did go out and measure it and see that that's insufficient also, the site distance that is. Based on the site distance alone, we think it's adequate to justify closing the street. When you look at it this way, of the 5 different ways you could use that intersection, turning out 3 ways or turning into, making a right or left into Webster Street, 4 of the 5 ways are documented as being unsafe. That's 80%. I think any of us here would say, well, if we knew something was unsafe 80% of the time, we'd choose not to do it. I guess moving on, if you kind of pay attention, I guess the the villages around us. Westmont, Clarendon Hills, and Hinsdale all have created dead ends on residential streets on westbound 55th. I can't really, the names of the streets are kind of escaping. Linden, Warwick, I think are in Westmont, and I can't remember the streets in Clarendon Hills and in Hinsdale. But much like Webster Street, those streets are all adjacent to the main through street leading into their respective downtown areas. I think that's kind of a key factor there. Somebody could say, well, what makes us different? I think that makes it different right there. People are trying to head into downtown, they get that red light, they don't want to wait. Generally, when they, that's the only safe way to use that intersection is to make a right turn in there. And, supported by the evidence shown through the study done by Public Works, the majority of that traffic is cut through traffic. I mean, even though the number of the cars coming down our street is less than the streets surrounding us, I think it also should be considered that our street is only a block long, whereas most of the streets around us are 3, 4, even longer. Also here in this packet, I've presented some petitions that we've had signed by the vast majority of the residents of Webster, Summit, Maine, and Washington. I think another thing making us unique here is every single person that we contacted on, that we spoke with on Summit Street, told us absolutely yes, that intersection's crazy, that shouldn't even exist. Those would be the people who would be affected directly if the street were closed. We would have no choice but to use Webster. Every single one of those people came to us, or I guess replied to us, yeah, absolutely, we'd be happy to sign this petition, we agree with you. Next, the request that we had, our request of having the street closed meets the guidelines of the Downers Grove road closure policy, which I've also attached. In that policy, I guess, I don't know if this is the correct time to ask or not, but I think that policy is supposed to be a vehicle or a means to give an objective or equitable way of getting a street closed. Gives you guidelines, things that need to be done, things that need to be considered, and we've met and exceeded pretty much every one of those standards as far as we're concerned. We can't find anything otherwise. I don't know if this is the right time to ask or not, but that was kind of our thought process, is that we were going about this in an equitable and, I guess, respectful manner. I guess to move on and kind of close here, or to attempt to close anyway, it's important to consider that it's been documented in writing. It's unsafe to turn off of Webster in any direction, and is presented by Ms. Newland tonight. It's unsafe to turn onto Webster, making a left off of 55th Street. I think when something's in writing and it acknowledges that we have an unsafe situation, I think the responsible thing to do is to address that. This option 3 does not address the concerns that we presented to the TAP Commission, which is cut through traffic. It doesn't do anything to address that. And it definitely does not address the left turn onto Webster from 55th. I know we could take the wait-and-see approach, but at what point does, I guess another question, I'm not sure if this is the correct time to ask or not, but what would the objective criteria be to determine whether or not the signage is successful? I mean, God forbid someone's hurt or killed, but, I mean, what would, we kind of like to know what would it take, what would be objective to determine whether or not it was successful. I mean, frankly, if we did nothing, we could say, well, there's no problem. We could do nothing, and no one's died, no one's had any problems. But this is something.
That's a fair and legitimate question. We'd have to actually have some metric that would be used to measure point A and point B. I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but yes, it would have to be something like that. Otherwise, you're right, it would be a meaningless measurement.
I guess just last couple quick points. We know I've spoken with John Loper from DuPage County Department of Transportation. He's also a Downers Grove resident, and when I was talking about the situation, proposed plans, he wasn't an expert in the field of the design of the widening of 55th approaching Maine, but it was kind of interesting. He told me, yeah, I live in Downers Grove, and my son is a teenager, and I forbid him to drive to turn on that street because I know all about it. It's totally dangerous. And I think by their schedule, by looking at the county schedule, which I don't have in front of me, those changes, the widening of 55th, that Main Street was supposed to, I think it was originally in the works for this year or the next year, but due to scheduling and funding, it's been pushed back, just like this year we had patching done on 55th, which was supposed to have taken place at least a year or two ago. So I know, we could say, well, let's wait and see what they do, but regardless, I think when we think of it this way, if they're going to widen the street, that's going to do nothing but make the situation worse with more traffic flow. And I guess another thing to consider that hasn't really been presented here is we do have, there's a house at the end of Webster that is also kind of a unique challenge. When the snow is piled up, or even when there's no snow, when there's, I guess in the middle of the summer and we have all the bushes and stuff in bloom, it's kind of difficult. The house is very close to the edge of the street. If that street does get widened, that's just another problem that's going to be aggravated further. I guess at this point, that's pretty much all I have. Would like to thank you for listening to us and taking us seriously with this. But again, we really hope you can take our consideration seriously and choose to, I guess, honor our request.
Thank you, Mr. Ruda, and again, I commend you on the very professional and persuasive materials that you put together. It's very helpful for our decision, and absolutely will be taken into consideration. I should have asked if we left today, but any colleagues have any questions for you? Not that we have to, but just in case anybody did, I want to give you the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Appreciate this. Giving us lots to think about. Other questions or comments from the audience with respect to this item? Very good, thank you. We'll move on to the next item, and then this won't be on, just so everyone knows, it'll be on which agenda?
Probably January 3rd, which is our next regularly scheduled council
Our next
meeting.
regular meeting, January 3rd. Thank you.
The next item takes us from traffic to parking. It's actually a motion to accept the downtown parking study, and Nan will also be presenting this item, but just one informational piece to keep in mind. Like any plan, and we've been talking about plans like comprehensive plan and long-range financial plans, the acceptance of this plan does not specifically approve or disapprove of any of the recommendations that are found in this study. Anything that requires a policy-level decision actually comes back to the council on just that policy with more supporting information and analysis. Therefore, accepting the parking study tonight does not actually approve any of the actual recommendations. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Nan to give us the background on the downtown parking study.
Thanks, Dave. I'm pleased to present the results of the downtown parking study, which is one of the village's strategic plan projects for 2011. Parking in our downtown involves many stakeholders, as you know, and affects how residents move about in our community. The fact that we have parking concerns at all is a vital sign, is a sign of our vital and healthy downtown. In this presentation, I'm going to briefly review background information about our downtown parking system and the parking study that was conducted. The two areas that I'll spend the most time on are the key findings and the recommendations moving forward. For the purpose of the downtown study, the downtown was defined as this 26-block area that's bounded by Franklin Street to the north, Elm Street to the east, Maple Avenue to the south, and Carpenter and Saratoga to the west. A major feature of the downtown is the BNSF Railroad, which crosses, with this busy train traffic that crosses through our downtown. A transportation study was last done in 1997, which recommended that additional parking be considered in the downtown. And in 1998, a follow-up parking deck site analysis confirmed this recommendation and led to the construction of the parking deck in the year 2003. The downtown has seen significant growth and change since that time. There are currently over 4,000 parking spaces in the downtown, which consist of 911 commuter parking spaces, which are available to non-commuters in the evenings and weekends. 1,237 shared-use parking spaces, the majority of which are available in either 2, 3, or 4-hour time periods. These are the spaces that you find on street or in the public parking lots where you can park and you can visit multiple destinations. There are 1,524 single-purpose parking spaces that are located at specific businesses on private property. The expectation is that a customer of a business will use those spaces and then move their car once they've done conducting their business at that place. There's also 400 residential parking spaces which are available to residents who own or rent residential spaces in the downtown. To talk a little bit about commuter parking, the amount of commuter parking spaces we provide in the downtown and the rates we charge to park there are conditions of 3 agreements the village has with the BNSF and with Metra. The agreements include a lease agreement with Metra for 250 spaces in the parking deck, to be used for commuter parking. The second is a grant agreement with Metra, where they provide the village with financial assistance for maintenance improvements for designated commuter lots. And the third is an agreement with the BNSF, where the village leases 5 of their parcels for parking. And this exhibit shows the location of those 5 parking lots. We have lots A, B, C, F, and then there's the North Forest lot, which is north of the library. We have committed to providing commuter parking in each of these lots through this agreement with BNSF, except for the North Forest lot, which has employee and shopper parking, and that's specifically called out in that agreement. This is a quick overview of financial information related to downtown parking. 85% of the revenue from the parking fund that's used for parking operations is generated from commuter parking permits and daily use fees. The remainder is generated from parking tickets and fines. 100% of the parking fund revenue for capital projects comes from Metra, as well as some commuter parking permits and fees. And lastly, just a breakdown of what Metra has contributed already or is obligated to contribute to the village for parking assistance is over $3.3 million to the village, which breaks down to $1.875 million for the parking deck lease that I mentioned earlier, as well as funds committed for the maintenance of other commuter lots in the downtown, as well as improvements at Belmont and at the Fairview stations. This is just an overview of the parking study itself. In May of 2011, the village contracted with Rich & Associates to study the parking. They collected an extensive amount of data about how much parking there is, who owns it, how often it's used, and when. They looked at turnover rates. They looked at what people's thoughts are, their opinions about parking, the amount of parking we need now, as well as into the future. They also looked at to compare our practices for operating our parking system compared to what are considered to be best practices in the parking industry. As part of the study, the consultant compared the current parking demand, which they measured as how the parking's currently used, how much it's used, and how much it's turned over in the downtown, compared to the build-out of the downtown, how much retail space, how much office space, and it's kind of a ratio. You have this much build-out in the downtown right now, you have this much parking demand right now. They did that for the purpose of predicting as that build-out or as that use in the downtown increases over time, what is that going to tell us about, how's that going to predict the future need for parking demand in the downtown? So that was another component of the study. The study also included a recommendation for action items moving forward and with room for discussion and debate and fine-tuning within ourselves and the community as we move forward with these items. Lastly, as part of the study, I just wanted to call out in particular the public involvement portion, which was really a very critical part of this project. A steering committee was formed at the beginning of this whole process that included 3 members of the Downtown Management Corporation and 5 members of the village staff. And during that study, there were comments received from over 2,000 people through either interviews, surveys, or focus groups. The study's progress and findings have been made available on the village's website, and they were presented to the Transportation and Parking Commission 3 times during the progress of the study, which were all recorded and available on the website as podcasts. Now I'm going to switch to the key findings of the study. Which are, we found in general, just to preface, when a parking system is what's considered to be 85% occupied, drivers start to perceive that parking is difficult. They have to hunt for parking, park in areas they don't perceive as desirable, or circle the block hoping to find a better space. During peak times, which we found to be Monday through Friday, midday, about 11 a.m. to about 1 p.m., we found that overall downtown public parking, this is the shared use parking, this is what's available to anybody no matter where you're going, is at or above 85% capacity. And that north of the tracks, parking was found to be over 90% capacity during those peak time periods. We also found that the parking deck is very well used. It has an average occupancy of 90% and reaches its capacity early in the day. Commuter parking areas were at almost 100% capacity. Employee parking was at about 82% capacity, and shopper parking at about 70%. We also found that the current parking occupancy rates, based on the projections from the consultant, will increase as vacant properties are filled, as properties redevelop, and as new development is constructed in the downtown. At peak times, on the single purpose or private side of the parking, we found occupancy during peak times to be at only 55% capacity. And of the parking that's available in the downtown, when you look at all the parking that's available and you take the ratio of what's shared use, public versus single use, it was 45% shared use and 55% public use, or public use, right? Which is less. The best practices ratio of this balance is 50 to 50, and we're at 45 to 55. Some additional key findings we found were that the mix of 2, 3, and 4 hour parking times are appropriate for the uses we have in the downtown. People felt like they were appropriate time uses for the most part throughout the downtown. However, there was a need expressed from businesses and customers in some areas for shorter term, higher turnover spaces where you have pickup type operations or very quick trip type of operations. They're looking for faster turnover of the vehicles that park in vicinity of those facilities. We also received a lot of survey feedback from library users who expressed a desire for time limits that would make it easier for shorter trips to the library, provide more turnover, and discourage longer-term parking in the north of the lot, north of the library. In comparing our parking lots to current regulations, we found the need to add 10 additional handicap spaces. We also found, this is our last slide for key findings, I just wanted to review that we also found that when reviewing our commuter parking rates, we found that commuters that pay the most for parking park the furthest from the station, which is the daily fee spaces in the deck. As well as we found that some neighboring communities charge more for permits for commuter parking than we currently do. In reviewing our Metra and BNSF agreements, we found that we provide 86 more commuter spaces than are required by these agreements. And we confirmed that there was a demand for overnight parking and for reverse commuter parking, which we do receive calls about this at Village Hall. Lastly, with respect to enforcement, the consultant measured a 6% parking violation rate on weekday periods and a 10% violation on weekends. And the current best management target is 5% for enforcement. To review the recommendations we're suggesting moving forward, we've divided these into a couple of the main categories that were brought up in the findings. The first one addresses the mix and the location of parking in the downtown. These are some of the recommendations that were suggested by the study, as well as the Parking Operations Group and the Downtown Management Corporation. These include to change some library parking lot hour time limits from 3 hours to 1 hour to provide that higher turnover. To create some 15-minute spaces at ends of blocks next to appropriate business uses. To change level 5 of the deck to all daily fee parking for commuters. To add loading zones in appropriate locations for deliveries and to sign and stripe them appropriately. And to allow non-permit holders to park in vacant permit spaces beginning at 11 a.m. These are in those commuter lots where they might not be 100% full. There may be a few spaces remaining in those lots after the commuters have gotten on the trains. With respect to the needs that were expressed for additional parking, we included recommendations that we investigate options to increase shared use parking north of the BNSF tracks, to look at such things as leasing private parking for commuters and or downtown employees, to make it so we can increase more parking for shoppers by potentially moving some of those commuters or downtown employees. And that is in conjunction with looking at relocating commuters from Lot A, where there are commuter parkers. We also included a recommendation to review our zoning regulations with respect to parking for future downtown developments and what they would need to do as far as addressing parking needs for those developments. The recommendations related to fees and permits include such things as consider charging for overnight parking, reviewing our policy. We have a current policy now where parking is available for free for handicapped commuters in those spots, as well as to adjust parking rates on a regular basis. With respect to enforcement, we made a recommendation to vary the hours of enforcement, to implement an anti-shuffling ordinance, which would prohibit people from moving their car from one space to another on the same block, to stay within that 2-hour time restriction, and to consider the creation of a courtesy first-time warning system, which would let people have a first buy, shoppers, people like that, let them know that they're getting a warning and the next time they'll get a ticket. This is our last slide. The next steps in this process will be to develop and present policy action items that will be presented to the Transportation and Parking Commission and then to Village Council for public input and implementation of these recommendations, as well as to develop plans and funding strategies to address the need for future parking demands, both for the downtown as it continues to develop or redevelop moving forward, as well as the increasing need for commuter parking, to look at addressing those needs at both the Belmont and the Fairview stations, where we do have the ability to handle more commuter parking. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. You're right, these have been packaged, these two items, the one before and this one, are both items of long-standing discussion. I was reminded that 10 years ago, one of the major issues was traffic, and I think the other one was parking in the downtown. So as much as things change, they remain the same. I'd like to think that there's an old saying, in your downtown, it's a good thing to have a parking problem, because if you don't, that means your downtown isn't doing too well. But so there's some good things to this. I'm glad we're trying to address this comprehensively, because I think it does speak to the need to do that with these kinds of issues. Just a couple of observations, and then I'll step back. One, I'm very pleased to see, because I don't think there were too many people here that were sitting up here back when we were discussing whether or not there was any need for a parking deck, and there was some serious debate as to whether or not it would ever be used. So the fact that it is at 90% capacity and filling up, and we're actually talking about how to better manage it is good to hear, because it means that was a good decision at the time. The other thing to point out is I'm struck by the fact that people in the we apparently don't have cheap seats when it comes to parking. People farther away actually pay more. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, so I'm glad we're looking at that. And by all means, we should be competitive in our parking rates. So I know there are a lot of different recommendations in here, and as was mentioned, they will be discussed and debated, and there will be differences of opinion. And we're not deciding anything tonight. We're simply listening to it, and whether you want to call it accepting or receiving the report, it will form the basis for a great deal of discussion in terms of what the actual action items will be. So thank you for everyone that contributed to that process and putting it together, and looking forward to hearing my colleagues and everyone else weigh in. So that's all I have at the moment. Questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Schnell?
Just again, I think things we've discussed and probably have not been addressed throughout the years. The north side from the study is obviously a problem area, and it always has been a problem area. And as the businesses become more viable and become better used by residents, which they are, that's continuing to happen. We need to somehow figure out a way of actually addressing it this time, I guess is the best way of putting it. And I'm not sure that was totally clear in the report. I mean, obviously it says we need to do something, but as our businesses on the north side continue to prosper, and we've got, I think, beginning to have a really good mix of good quality restaurants and things that people really want to go to, we need to do something, and I don't know what the magic answer is. At one time it was a deck on the north side. I don't know if that's viable now or not, mainly because of the costs associated with something like that. But, as we look at perhaps mixing things up, if we could, and I think we will, look at some of the commuter lots on the north side and maybe freeing those up for customer parking and taking those people and putting them in the deck or whatever the answers may be. I think that's something that we really need to take seriously and need to address this time around, because when we put the deck in, yes, I think it solved a lot of the problems on the south side. It didn't, I don't think, touch the problems at all on the north side. I think the other thing that I've read into this study, and I've read it 3 times because I think it's difficult to just comprehend it all one time around, is again, I think going back to a lot of the discussion we had before, be careful what you do, because whatever, if you fix A, B, and C may all of a sudden become a bigger problem. So I think we need to, from my perspective, we need to look at this more than just fixing one thing. We need to fix a lot of things. I think that's what the report is trying to do. So as we go through it and try to implement some of the recommendations, I think we need to look at them more comprehensively than individually, if that makes any sense. I mean, it does to me, but I hope it does in the way I'm saying it. So, I'm looking forward to having discussions with downtown management and the staff and TAP and everything else, because I think it's a good problem to have, but it is a problem. And, the economy is slow now. If we have a problem now, as the economy picks up, we're really going to have a problem. And I think this is the time to really bite the bullet and start discussing what the solutions are.
Thank you, Mayor. The 2 points that you brought up that struck me, and I just wondering if you had any information now for us, or if you have to get back to us. You mentioned the vacant commuter spots, the permit spots would be available for others to use at 11 o'clock. Why would we do 11 and not earlier? I mean, basically all the express trains are done by 9 o'clock, 9:30. Our store's open at 10, so why wouldn't we use a 10 o'clock hour?
We suggested 11 because there's some enforcement implications with that. Our enforcement officer has to have time to go through the lots and do all of his counts before we, checking all the permits before that time period. We did suggest an earlier time, but that's been a discussion back and forth among staff, and before we bring something forward, we would continue to have those discussions and make it as early as we could.
All right, well, I would encourage you to do so, because I'd like to see 10 o'clock and not 11 o'clock. You also mentioned that there's 86 more Metra spots that we provide than what we're contracted, if you want to call it that. What is our plan with that?
I'll take that one, Ann. This is a very valuable report in that regard. We've talked as individuals and collectively about how much commuter parking we should provide and where, and balancing the funding and revenue needs and the needs of shoppers, et cetera. This report finds that we have 86 more than required. It also makes a recommendation that we should look to private spots and to Village Hall and other places to relocate commuter parkers out of lots A and B and then convert those into shopper parking. What this does is this information gives us a great position to start detailed conversations with Metra and BNSF to see under what conditions we could make those moves. So that 86 number is very important. Also, the recommendations in this report as to where those commuters would go are very important, because now we have some concrete ideas to present to Metra and BNSF. We'll probably do that in the summer and get back to you with a policy discussion at that time.
So basically, this time next year, we'll have a solid answer on what we're going to do with those 86 spots. So until then, those people, whoever they are,
correct,
are safe and sound until then.
Right, but I see late spring, middle of summer is the time we'd be talking to Metra, BNSF, really engaging in a dialogue, and then present the findings back to this council and see if there's any opportunity to implement those things.
Okay, because if we don't get anything there, I would just say we eliminate them, and we just go by the numbers. If they're not willing to negotiate with us for changes that we'd like to see, towards Metra.
Thank you, Mayor. First up, thanks to Downtown Management. The chairman is here, along with board member Mr. Johnson. Mr. McCormick was part of the study group that put this document together, along with Linda Kunze and Marilyn Weir, and having Downtown Management Corporation involved just makes perfect sense. So thanks for all the hard work they've done. A couple of things, Nan touched on a few of them, but I want to kind of recap. There's 24 pages of comments in this document, and there are 13 action items, and I think we can overlay those pages of comments to the action items pretty well to see what the folks let us know were the problems that are going to be addressed here in these action items. You know, as Mayor Tully said, being at or close to capacity village-wide or downtown-wide for parking is a concern of ours, and we need to start to figure out what we're going to do. As far as the acceptance and the receiving of the report, I think it's an important thing to do tonight because it does let our staff begin work on these 13 action items, which are, I think, one of them, or the downtown parking study is one of our big 12 or more action items for 2012.
Yes, on January 3rd, you'll see a more formalized list of an action plan, high priority items, and implementation of this parking study is on that list.
Great. And this study, much like the comp plan, which was actually used as a tool to formulate some of the things in the parking study, is going to be used as a tool for the future action items going forward. A couple of things I'm really pleased to see in here is the library considerations. The shuffling ordinance is a big thing that I see in town all day long. Mr. Johnson and I, and now Commissioner Durkin, have brought up those 86 spots. I would not just look at A and B lots, but any lots that we can open up more space. You know, the C lot right down there on Warren, there is a chunk of space there for shopper parking, but maybe there can be some expansion there or down in A or part of B. So there's a lot of options to us here, and I think having these recommendations and a really, really good set of data to go by is going to help this issue that we have with parking downtown. So I'm very ready to accept it, and I think that as we move forward into 2012, we'll see some improvements. The last but not least, I guess it's a question that, of course, I don't need tonight because it just popped in my head, but the new video surveillance parking monitoring system has been up and running now for a number of months, and when the time is right, if we could get some information on how that's being used, and I have a feeling it's being very effective in the enforcement, but that tool, along with some of these, you know, changing of the hours, different enforcement tactics, I think, you know, with the courtesy ticket will help get the word out that we are serious about parking enforcement in our downtown area.
We will get you the information on the effectiveness of that software and that application, but as it relates to this recommendation in the report, the anti-shuffling ordinance is made possible because we have the right technology. In years past, we really that would have been a major operational concern to us, but now we have the technology to implement an anti-shuffling ordinance.
Thanks. That's all I had for now, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Nothing to add, really, so thank you.
We've opened it up for discussion.
Okay, well, thank you for the report. There's a lot of good information in there. As Commissioner Neustadt mentioned, that I'm sure it's on the top 10 list. And Commissioner Schnell also pointed out the same problem that we have with moving traffic is path of least resistance. You know, when you fix one problem, you're shuffling it somewhere else, so we got to move cautiously. And this document will help, instead of putting Band-Aids here or there. So I think it's a good document. There's, I've been commenting for years on how it's more expensive to ride a Ferris wheel in our Grow Fest than it is to park all day. And a lot of that had to do with our arrangements with Metra. And I'm sure if we, you know, this will help us with Pace and Metra, and maybe we can get some action from them finally. I believe on the commuter lots, Commissioner Durkin, I think we oversell a lot of those lots by like 15-20%, something like that on a daily basis. Because sometimes, you know, a lot of people have permits, but they don't use them all the time. So maybe that's where some of those 86 spots come in, I don't know. I know some people might be rather unhappy after waiting for years, getting in line and qualifying for a spot right next to the tracks, that they may read this document and find out that their wait is over. You know, it's like losing the 50-yard line seats at the Bears games or something. You know, you may have to walk further.
What's the, well, I think the comment that Manager Fielman makes all the time is that I think we believe that Pierce Downer's permit is still available. It's been passed down.
The other comment struck me is it's an old yogiism. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. And I'm glad that the study addressed some of the perceptions as well. We have different perceptions out here in the burbs than in the city. So anyway, I look forward to working on this study, on this plan, that we start getting some of these things done. I hope we can get the cooperation from Metro that we need. It'll be a long haul. This isn't going to be a quick fix, and I realize that. So,
Just keep in
thank you
mind,
for all the hard
whatever
work.
changes we make to the commuter parking, I'm the guy that gets on the train every morning, I'm going to hear about it every single day. Whatever you do. Any other comments, questions?
I am excited about this. The sooner we begin to press Metro and the sooner we begin to try and implement these recommendations, the better for me. We've talked about it up here. It's been a subject that's been kicked around for quite some time. We finally bit the bullet and now have the tool that I think supports what an awful lot of us kind of felt anecdotally. So I'm encouraged by it and excited by it.
Questions or comments on the receipt or acceptance of the downtown parking study from any members of the audience? Good evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those who don't recognize me, my name is Dan McCormick. I'm part of the Downtown Management Corporation. Excuse me. The board would like to thank the village for allowing us to be part of the study. I was one of the members on the steering committee, and we were on the committee from the get-go, from interviewing the engineers or the consultants all the way through tonight. So we appreciate that. We also appreciate the fact that the consultants actually took the time to listen to us, not only the members of the steering committee, but they interviewed people on the street, businesses, and so on and so forth. It's very gratifying to hear tonight that we made the top 10 list. Yay! But the key is not the findings. You know, everybody knows that the parking is a problem. And if that's all you take away from it, we just wasted, or you just wasted, or the village just wasted a lot of taxpayer money. I mean, we really need to implement those recommendations. They are good recommendations, they're a start, and as long as we got the momentum going, we ask the council to keep that mo going, so to speak. The businesses that have reviewed this, the businesses that have generated sales tax revenue and property taxes, we're fully behind this. And we appreciate the village actually taking this step to continue to make our downtown the vibrant and authentic downtown that we all know have come to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Thank you for your participation as well. Please. Good evening.
Good evening. Willis Johnson, 846 Rogers. As most of you know, I am an advocate for north of the tracks, which certainly was again reinforced tonight, or is reinforced in the study. I would hope that in working with this study, that you take the individual action items independently and not as a whole, so that those that can be implemented quickly and easily can be taken advantage of right away, where some of the longer term items, maybe they will have to wait rather than considering them all at one time. I think one of the biggest ones, and one item that has come up several times already tonight, and that is the 86 spaces that are over the agreement with Metro. That, depending on how you want to look at the numbers, that's a minimum of a 7% increase in parking capacity for other than commuters. And I would hope that while I realize you probably well, maybe you could just take an X right now and say, okay, guys, you're missing those 86 spaces as the permits come up. But I would hope that you might act on that, and again, being part of the downtown management and a part of the people that got to participate in or give input into the study. Again, I would hope that the north side of the tracks would benefit as a result of this. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Johnson. Good evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rick Ashton. I'm the new director of the Downers Grove Public Library, and I can't find a place to park. But maybe you have heard that no one goes to the public library anymore. We have the internet. But apparently that news hasn't arrived in Downers Grove just yet. Last year, the Downers Grove Public Library had 630,000 walk-in visits. That's about 105 per hour open throughout the entire year. And most of those people came by car. So there's a very significant parking need for the library, and we are very happy that the study focused very strongly on the lot north of the library and on how some adjustments to the way that lot is managed might help with turnover and availability. So we're looking forward to working with the village staff and seeing if we can't address the number one customer complaint of customers of the Downers Grove Public Library, which is that they're in the building and they're telling us there's no place to park. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ashton. Thank you for being here tonight, and it's a pleasure to see you. Congratulations on the new position. We're glad to have you at the library and as part of our community.
Glad to be here.
And I'll make a point to get over there and visit with you real soon, and glad to have both you and Mr. Kohler here tonight, our library board president. Thank you for taking the time to come out and give us your views. Good evening.
Good evening. George Calvino, 605 Gear Street. I was actually glad to hear the mention about the north side of the tracks and the parking permits, and I would just suggest that action is taken as quickly as possible, and I know we have a great staff here and they do a great job. So, thank you.
Thank you, George. Appreciate your comments. Any other questions or comments from the audience with respect to the downtown parking study? Good evening, ma'am.
Hi. Robin Mariella, 5421 Webster Street. I was actually here to listen to talk about the problem on our street. I'm fortunate because I live close to town and I'm a commuter and I get to walk. I'm curious, when you did the survey, I ride the 740 and the 720 train. Biggest complaint I hear all morning from people all around me is the commuter parking lot is completely filled and they can't find parking. These people actually pay for their parking. People move to Downers Grove because we've got this great train line. And the idea that you're going to kind of like make a lot of people unhappy, I mean, it doesn't affect me, but it's like probably you might want to survey people on the trains who can't get the parking, who are getting tickets. Mayor, I feel for you because I think you will be addressed quite a bit on the train.
See, it's already started. I hear from the commuters on the train platform every single day. It's my own personal survey, but yes, no matter what we do, I will continue to hear comments about parking for commuters on the train platform. So, thank you for coming to the microphone and sharing your views. And we're not taking any action yet. We're just simply accepting the study, and there will be discussion. Yes. Well, welcome to our world. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments with respect to the downtown parking study? Very good. Thank you. Well,
that ends our first reading tonight, Mayor.
That ends our first reading. And brings us to item 9 on our agenda, which is the mayor's report.
Mayor, I'm going to excuse myself if you don't mind.
Oh, not at all. Yes.
Good time to do this. I apologize.
Perfect break. No, thank you, Commissioner Barnett. We were aware that we had a pressing commitment, so thank you very much. That's no comment on the the level of how interesting my report's going to be. But we are done with the business portion of our meeting for the most part. The one item I have on the mayor's report tonight that I want to address is the ComEd update. As you know, since we first brought up this issue with the incident, the power outages during the summer and reliability questions, we have continued to address this topic on an ongoing basis since the town hall meeting. And I continue to appreciate the input that we're receiving, and particularly some recent input from Ms. Crawford from the chamber with respect to some recent experiences in terms of reliability, so thank you for providing that. We will keep that on our radar screen and follow up with the representatives of ComEd that we're dealing with. Where we're at for this week's update, and then will be the update that will round out the end of the year. ComEd continues to work on equipment upgrades, which is always good to hear. In the priority circuits that were identified during the village's reliability review that we presented at the town hall meeting. Specifically, ComEd is installing 500 feet of underground cable replacement in the area near the intersection of Fairview and Ogden. Additionally, ComEd is completing a cable replacement project near the east of Main Street near Bonnie Bray in Lancaster. So, not to say that they're ignoring the south side, Commissioner. Both of these projects were identified by ComEd in response to the village's reliability report. So, I'm glad to see that some things that we actually raised in the report through the villages and staff in particular, their hard work on that report, are seeing some actual improvements in terms of hardware, which is good. With respect to the softer side of their efforts in regards to enhanced tree trimming that ComEd is planning on doing, the village forester has completed her review and comment of ComEd's plans for enhanced tree trimming. The work is scheduled to begin in January 2012. I feel sorry for whoever's going to be doing tree trimming in January of 2012 around here. But village staff is currently working with ComEd to finalize communication efforts that will inform affected residents of the tree trimming work. Candidly, we have some questions about perhaps ComEd could do a little better with respect to notifying residents when the tree trimming is taking place, and we continue to work with them about trying to improve that so that people know what's happening, when it's happening, and why it's happening. And that's the ComEd update for this week, unless there are any questions or comments from anyone with respect to that update. Hearing none, we will move to the manager's report. Mr. Fielder.
I have one informational item concerning a proposed sign ordinance amendment. The Village Council approved a sign ordinance amendment a couple of years ago, and we are proposing to move forward with a process that would result in a 2-year extension of the compliance deadline, which is now May of 2012. In this presentation, I'll give a little bit of background, talk about the compliance rates we've already achieved since 2005, go through the few reasons for the extension, and then explain the process going forward. As I mentioned, the Village Council in 2005 approved a comprehensive amendment to our sign ordinance. In that ordinance amendment, the sign regulations changed in some cases very dramatically. That new ordinance in 2005 includes a clause that requires compliance when you make any changes to your existing signs. That ordinance also includes a 7-year amortization period, which was based on the expected life of a sign, and to allow businesses and other sign owners ample time to make financial arrangements to replace the sign at the end of that 7-year period if it happened to be not in compliance with the ordinance. That compliance deadline, as I mentioned earlier, is May of 2012. A couple notes on the compliance that we've achieved since 2005. First and foremost, the ordinance is working. There are about 2,250 signs in the village of Downers Grove. 1,500 or so of those signs are now in compliance with the current ordinance, which is about 66%. Only about 750 signs do not comply. That's about 33%. It appears, based on a review of village data, that we are getting compliance at a rate of about 200 signs per year. And then if we extend the amortization deadline by 2 years, that is, do the math, 400 signs that would come into compliance in that time frame. That would be about 85% compliance that would have been achieved since 2005. So again, the ordinance and the triggers in that ordinance are working as planned. The reasons for the extension, you heard Chamber of Commerce Director Laura Crawford mention this. Economic conditions change. We are not in the same economic conditions that we were in 2005. Replacing a non-compliant sign is a real cost to businesses, and given the economic conditions that we just recently have gone through and are currently in, we wanted to recognize those conditions and extend the sign ordinance to allow more time for compliance. And that really is the second bullet point, to allow more time for compliance. The ordinance is working. We expect additional voluntary changes through just the administration of our current ordinance. And we have a very successful program on Ogden Avenue called the Oasis Grants, which allows businesses to receive grants for many improvements to their property, which includes signage improvements, and the signs would have to comply if they got an Oasis grant. The next bullet point is to reduce village costs. If the village were to enact enforcement activities right now, we would incur some very real expenses. If we give a 2-year extension, the number of signs we would have to enforce against would drop dramatically, therefore would save village costs. And finally, a 2-year extension, I think, when you consider the previous 3 bullet points, is really supportive of what you hear at the staff say all the time. We should facilitate, not regulate. If we were to go into enforcement mode of the 2012 deadline right now, we would really be in a heavy regulatory and enforcement mode. As far as next steps, the ordinance amendment does require a public hearing before the Plan Commission. We plan to do that in January. That means that the actual consideration of the 2-year extension would be back in front of this council in February 2012. Assuming that would pass, and I have had individual conversations with council members on this item, we would do 3 things. We would be in a mode where we would be in strict adherence to the extended 2014 deadline. We would then go into an extensive public outreach and education program to make sure that any owners of non-compliant signs understand that May of 2014 is the deadline, and to explain to them the resources that are available to come into compliance, and to really make sure that they're aware and understand consequences of noncompliance by 2014. And we will continue to administer the existing sign ordinance, which has served us well and garnered about 66% compliance since it's been in place in 2005. So at this point, this is just sort of a heads up and an informational item to the council and to the community that we intend to pursue this and look for the Plan Commission hearing in January. With that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Waldeck?
Thank you. I had conversations with Dave before about this. I'm rather disappointed in staff's recommendation to extend the deadline for the sign ordinance, basically with no other real plans or information. The enforcement plan that we're expecting to put in place 2 years from now is an enforcement plan that we could put in place now. Usually when council passes some ordinance or some requirement, one of the first things we ask of staff is about enforcement, and I think that was lacking in this case. Over the last several years, I've asked time and time again that we review this ordinance. I warned in the impending deadline, and there was no action or review. There's been exceptions made at various levels for under certain conditions, but there was really no extensive review and no, shall we say, forewarning that we would have this problem with compliance, and that now at almost midnight or 5 minutes to midnight, we're going to have this extension, and we're not offering anything else. It's like like I told Dave, I says it's like a parent who likes to count to 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then you get to 3 and nothing happens. And you know, are we really going to get that much more compliance if we keep counting and backing up and counting again, starting over? And I'm also disappointed that I'm sure we have a count of the signs that came in compliance because of a change of business or remodeling or whatever the case might be, whatever the trigger was that forced the business to revise the sign. I'm sure there's other signs out there that were revised voluntarily, knowing that there would be a deadline coming. And these are good corporate citizens. These are people who voluntarily obeyed the law. They saw it coming, they put money out, and now their competition has decided that, well, you know, we'll wait until you know, maybe it'll never happen, maybe there'll be a change in council, change in the rules, something will happen that'll pull us out. And in the last year or so, we've had this Oasis program where some people who early on were good corporate citizens and did what they were supposed to do. Now we have an OASIS program where we'll actually use tax dollars and subsidize signs. And I kind of have a problem with that. And maybe what we ought to do is announce a deadline on the OASIS program for signage to try and increase compliance in the long run. And maybe announce that signs that are completed prior to the deadline will be, for signs that have already been constructed and installed without being forced to, maybe they should get a reward for being good corporate citizens and qualify for some sort of reward. I just have a problem with just saying, well, let's just give it 2 years, and I would hope that when this gets to the Planning Commission, that maybe they would have some other recommendations so that we just aren't extending it 2 years, but putting something, either carrots or additional carrots or additional sticks or something to get better compliance without just saying we're going to extend it. And I think that's what I have a problem with is, let's go 2 years. Well, if I wait 2 years as a businessman, maybe I'll get another year. And by the time they get to enforcing on me, maybe I'll have another year. And that's, I don't know, I just think that's not a good practice to get into. And like I say, I hope the Planning Commission will look at this and maybe come up with some better suggestions so we can accomplish this. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rankin?
There's a few points that Dave made that I think are important. Recognizing current and recent economic conditions, reducing the workload and cost for the village, and promoting the facilitate, not regulate approach. My family and I are small business owners, and this economy has really, taken us for quite a wild ride, and we're right on the verge of getting out of that scary part of the hit of the economy. And I think that we need to consider that and how it affects people. And if we're going to ask someone to spend $10,000 on a sign, that's a big hit for a small business. So I was back and forth on this issue, but I think this is the right way to go.
Thank you, Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple points or questions I have based on Commissioner Waldeck's comments. Can we get information on the 66% that changed their signs and why?
Yes.
What are the penalties?
Once we go into enforcement mode, the penalties would be the same penalties for any ordinance violation. They would consist of fines. It could be daily fines of up to $750, and then likely through a court appearance where we would ask for a mandatory order of compliance, which is lawyer speak that I learned from Enza for, you have to change your sign. So it's really ordinance violations, fines, and an order from the judge to make you come into compliance.
Not being a lawyer, how would the courts view, if we take someone into court because they didn't comply with a sign, would our changing of the deadline impact the court's ruling? Does that make sense? Am I clear with what I'm asking?
That's something I'd like to work with Enzo on and get a more detailed response to. And we will have those responses when it gets to the council in February for the actual ordinance itself.
And then when you come before us, Dave, can we get from you the actual education process that you're going to go, that we're going to have staff going out to? Because I know that we're going to get bombarded with a bunch of calls and a lot of requests to meet for whatever, coffee or sandwich or whatever, just to talk about this.
Yes.
I do agree with Commissioner Rankin about the economy, but we've told businesses they've had 7 years to do this. So when you're in your business, you have a business plan, and just like we budget, that's a successful business does the same as well. So as much as I don't want to support this, I think it is the right thing to do, but I really want to know more so on the education process and how elegantly we're going to tell people what the penalties are and what's going to happen to them, and more importantly, how the courts would view a change in the extension, so,
We can get all that information packaged up for you by February discussion.
great, thank you.
Commissioner Schnell.
For the February discussion, I agree that because of the economic downturn, this is something that we need to do. However, something that Commissioner Waldeck said I think is intriguing and I'd like to pursue. If by the February meeting, we can get an idea of one, how much money is available in the total, for the Total Oasis program, and if we made a full court press, or the EDC made a full court press, particularly talking to those businesses that are not in compliance, and trying to sell the fact that there are monies available, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and use the first year, so use 2012, as really the pivotal, well, thank you, it's late, year to try to get as many in compliance as possible, and I think that's why we need to have an idea of actually how much money is available, and then put a deadline, mid 2013, that unless you're a brand new business, I mean, you just cannot apply for, you can apply for an OASIS grant, but not an OASIS grant that would be part of the signage. Obviously, if a new business comes in and wants, and we've had some of that happen on Ogden, which is obviously where Oasis is, but we've had some of that recently where there's new businesses and are taking advantage of this. I just think we need to put the full court press in 2012, try to get that compliance of 200 a year up to maybe 250 or more by putting the carrot out there of the OASIS funding. And I think it's going to take some effort on Mike's part to really introduce this and sell it and education and all that wonderful stuff. But if indeed we can do more of that, if the funds are available, then I think that would be something that would be beneficial. I do agree that they've had lots of time to do this, and if it wasn't for the economy, I probably would not be interested in extending it. But I also think we need to show the businesses that we are serious about 2014. And I think one way of doing that, particularly on Ogden, is to say, there's funds available for this year and part of 2013, and then that's it. It's over as far as helping to pay for science, and that hopefully will help this. I'm thinking of one business in particular who seems to be doing a very good business, and granted it's a restaurant. Restaurants run on a very small margin, but they have a really, really, really big sign. And it's definitely not in compliance, and I would really like to see, to set, I guess, the tone that they are in compliance. And if we could somehow work with them, with the OASIS program, then maybe that's a way of doing it too. So anyway, if you can get that information for the February meeting, that would be good.
Before turning to Commissioner Neustadt, who's been waiting very patiently, I just have a question. The OASIS grants don't change the signs. You apply for an OASIS grant, and as a condition of getting OASIS grant money, you have to come into compliance, right?
That's correct, and in certain cases, if approved by the councils, funding for the signage replacement itself could be granted.
But
Right, but I mean, basically, we're not going around handing out money to change signs.
No, it's
You
part
have
of
a program for facade improvement.
Correct, it's part of an
And
overall
then if
program.
you take village money, yeah, you gotta come into compliance immediately. But I just want to make sure I understand something correctly.
That's
We're not
correct.
going out saying people lining up to pay for the signs.
But you could use it to
I don't know if
do
I'll do
landscape. No, I'm not saying just for signs, but you could use it for enhancement of landscaping along Ogden Avenue. You could use it if they're, well, you put the sign
Well,
up.
the only reason I heck is I think the OASIS grants, there's a lot more going on, and the sign is almost ancillary. It's sort of like if you're going to take the money, yes, you have to come to compliance, but that's no different than when
That's correct.
when
That is,
people come to Village Hall and they demand a license. We don't give it to them unless they paid their parking fees and all their other stuff. I mean,
I want to make it clear that this council has provided direction that while signage is eligible, it is not a signage program, and there has to be
Right.
other elements, and the other elements take precedence. So I can get all the council a recap of the OASIS program, the requirements and the funding and what it's been used for as part of the discussion coming up.
But the way I understood it is that there could be an application for a sign only. They would just be bundled up at the end of the program or whatever.
That is correct.
So the priority goes to changes and then also the sign, but you could also apply just for the sign. You just are put on back in the line.
and of the bundling.
I don't know why we would do that.
But we are.
Well, if we want to review the OASIS program, I think that's a related and separate policy discussion that we will take into consideration as part of the 2-year extension
Yes,
that we're
what do you
proposing.
say?
That's fine.
Maybe the planning commission can come up with a,
I don't know. Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's not forget that the OASIS program is for Ogden Avenue only, and the sign ordinance is for the entire village. So whatever we do for OASIS, we have to consider for the entire village. So let's not start making special considerations for one group over another, even though I guess the OASIS kind of already does that in some regard, but we have to be really careful. As far as this extending the deadline, this isn't something that we just started talking about tonight. It seems like we have a lot of good questions. This is the forum for the questions and kind of a workshop and first reading atmosphere, but the manager's office has been communicating with council members, Chamber of Commerce, Economic Development Corporation, Downtown Management for months, I think, on this topic to get to this point tonight, to get to the next point of Plan Commission public hearing. So to say that this is something new is not accurate. We have been planning for the deadline, and this is part of the plan. I believe the majority of the council in both action plan meetings, we don't, maybe in the long-range financial plan meetings, if I can remember that far back, I don't know if it was in there or not, but we have been talking about this, and it is something that we have given consideration to. So I'm in full support of it. I think that it gives us a chance to try and get folks to come into compliance. It also gives us a chance to formulate that enforcement and that deadline that is coming here in 2014 now, if this does get approved. So I'll be in support of this and appreciate all the questions and comments that have come tonight, but we need to remember that this isn't something that just sprouted up tonight. It's been an ongoing, looking forward item for a number of months.
Thank you. We anticipate 85% compliance. We project 85% compliance by year what?
By the proposed new compliance deadline of May 2014.
We're projecting that there will be 85% compliance.
Based on historical rate of change.
Right, I realize that's projected, but basically by doing nothing, we anticipate 85% compliance.
By doing the same things we've been doing since '05, which is constant.
Corrected, I didn't say we're doing nothing.
Constant reminders of the deadline, informing the sign owners of what might happen, informing them of the triggers, and proactively administering programs like OASIS and downtown facade programs.
Thank you for that clarification. Also, I feel compelled, and I didn't plan on doing this either, but because we're going to talk about it again later, but the history here, I think, needs to be remembered. And there's only two people who are sitting up here now that were sitting here when the sign ordinance was born. And the 7 years, folks, is completely arbitrary. I mean, the idea was to enhance the aesthetics in signage throughout the entire community. And yes, a lot of work was put into developing that ordinance. The ordinance was not the end-all, be-all. That's a whole other policy discussion. But 7 years was picked for a reason, or at least as lore puts it. The reason was that's the average life of a sign. Now, whether that's true or not is besides the point. The thinking behind it was, well, if the sign is going to be replaced in about 7 years anyway, then there is no cost or need to enforce, because when the time comes to change over the sign, and I don't mean because it doesn't last that long, because of various different issues, change of ownership, change of the name, change of the business, whatever, the sign would turn over and you would have normal compliance simply by the fact that somebody would be wanting to change their sign anyway. And as long as they were changing it, they would now have to change it in accordance with our new ordinance. This is not like the overgrown weeds ordinance where everybody knows you can't have 7-foot tall weeds in your front yard, and somebody refuses over and over again to come into compliance, and finally you have to enforce it, and you're saying, no, we'll give you another week, another week, another week, another week. This is not that model at all. This is a situation where the signs were already there, folks. What we did was a massive attempt to try to improve the aesthetics throughout the community. And in order to do that, we wanted to facilitate that change and avoid regulating if necessary, understanding that when you get to the last yard before you cross the goal line, yes, you might have to push a little bit. But the 7 years wasn't some magic statute of limitations or something like that. It was, we think that we're going to get a majority of compliance simply during that period of time, because signs will naturally change over and they will come into compliance just because, without any enforcement. And that seems to be exactly what's been happening, and pretty much on schedule, with the exception of one thing, the Great Recession. And I gotta believe that there were a lot of businesses that took a pause, deep breath, and either went out of business or decided they weren't going to make any changes to their business, and thus their signs, because they wanted to see where things went. So that was sort of like a little pause button in the world, not just our ordinance. So I see this as simply, okay, everybody paused, and we're all now businesses are back, as Commissioner Rankin said. We're going back to making changes, buying, selling, and signs are going to start turning over again. And if history is a teacher here, we're going to see the same level of compliance. All we're doing is trying to achieve it over a slightly longer period of time. If we can achieve close to 100% compliance by people doing it voluntarily, because when they need to change over their signs, and I'm not saying we stretched out 100 years, of course not. To me, that's a no-brainer, and it is absolutely consistent with the facilitated model that this council and this village has been following. And again, that's not to suggest that somebody, if they just wait us out long enough, they're going to get away with something and not have to cut the weeds in their front lawn. It's about achieving a goal here, and achieving it in a very efficient and, for the most part, voluntary approach. I think it's been working great, quite frankly, and look forward to watching it continue to work great until we get to 85% compliance or more. And then we can deal with the, then Commissioner Waldeck, then you can pull out the big bat and beat with the people who won't come into compliance. So that's all I have to say.
And that ends my report tonight, Mayor.
Are there any other policy issues that we can bring up in the context
for the end of the year? Thank you.
All right, very good. That brings us to the attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I only have one ordinance to present tonight, and that is an ordinance restricting vehicle movement on Webster Street. This ordinance will be on the active agenda on January 3rd.
Thank you very much. That brings us to 12, and not the 12 days of Christmas or anything, but council member reports and new business. Commissioner Durkin.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to wish everyone a very happy holiday season. If you're traveling, safe travels to you and your families. And for any of those individuals that have not shopped yet, please remember our stores here in Downers Grove. We desperately need the sales tax revenue. And more importantly, if you're looking to buy a Bentley or know anyone who's looking to buy a Bentley, please remember Bentley of Downers Grove. We'd love to be able to service you in that need of a new car or even this servicing. And I don't work for Bentley of any sort. I just would love to have you spend your money here in town.
We'll even find you a parking space.
And happy holidays.
Don't even say that.
Commissioner Schnell.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas to one and all, and Happy New Year. Make it safe, and don't drink and drive. We'll see everybody back here on the 3rd. And if you don't have the money to buy a Bentley, which I'm sure most of us do not, a Chevy, a Ford, anything like that would be nice. We have Chrysler. We have lots of great car dealerships in Downers Grove, and if on your wish list is a new car, please visit one of them, because I'd rather have the tax revenues here than in Naperville or Lisle. So anyway, have a great and safe holiday season.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you. From the Waldeck family to all the families out there, Merry Christmas. As suggested, everybody do your shopping here, and also remember the less fortunate at this holiday season and beyond. Maybe you can find a way to spread out your Christmas cheer throughout the year. But Merry Christmas, and whatever holidays you're celebrating, enjoy those too. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rankin.
Ditto.
Very concise, thank you. Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick report, another report from Downtown Management Corporation. The Gingerbread Festival was a great success. A survey that Downtown Management put out showed that some of the downtown shops saw a 40% increase in not only sales, but also customers and traffic over the weekend. So it was a great event, and it's still ongoing downtown. There's still gingerbread houses and a gingerbread theme in our village, so please consider shopping in downtown. Along with Commissioner Waldeck, if you could extend some help to the folks that need it, the villages, providing a coat drive from now until January 8th. Clean, gently used coats and winter accessories can be dropped off here at Village Hall or at the police department. And along with everyone else, a very Merry Christmas, and my new favorite thing to say is Happy Everything. Be safe, and we'll see you next year. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just first want to say that we will be appropriately recognizing her later, but congratulations to our state champion swimmer, Gabby Sims, who was honored appropriately by District 99 earlier this week We will be doing something for her as well. I just want to congratulate her before the year wraps up. This is the last Village Council meeting of 2011, and I want to thank everyone for making it a truly memorable experience and looking forward to 2012. I personally want to wish each and every one of my colleagues and each and every one of the village staff and everyone in Downers Grove a very Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and a safe and joyous New Year. We look forward to seeing you in 2012. Good night, God bless. I think I need to actually ask for a motion to adjourn. Take two. Have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett? Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. We are adjourned. I get to say it again. Good night and God bless. See you in 2012.
You go into the